Hello and welcome to the special meeting of the Larkspur City Council on Wednesday, February 7th, 2024 at 6:34 p.m. We have had a series of technical difficulties with power being out off and on here in Larkspur, so we are a little late in our evening. And I really appreciate the candidates for Planning Commission who have been able to adjust their schedule to get to see us tonight earlier. So if those of you who are online joining us for the regular meeting, it will follow the Planning Commission interviews, which will be taking place first, and you're welcome to stay on Zoom or in the room. And then we will commence with the regular meeting. The second thing to know is our council member, Kevin Carroll, is on Zoom with us. So there are three of us. We have had our mayor must recuse himself from these planning commission interviews due to having a work relationship and conflict with one of the candidates. So typical of what we need to do so that we have a transparent process for our interviews. So we will have 10 minutes to talk with everyone, and we have a list of questions. And I'd like to ask our first candidate to, let's do a roll call. I forgot all about that. Allison, would you please do a roll call?
Councilmember Carroll,
Here.
Councilmember Paulson,
Here.
Vice Mayor Wang.
Here. Thank you. So our first candidate is Tamara Hull. Please join us. These are. Yes, you are. And we'll make sure our audio person can hear you and see you. Are we okay over there?
Can you hear me?
Okay. And you might just want to lower that. It's kind of there in your face.
It's not
There.
what you're not supposed to
I
do.
know. So great. Thank you for being here. And we do have your application. So I guess the first question is, thank you for applying. What do you perceive is the role of the Planning Commission?
I believe the planning commission is like an advisory to the city council, and that, I know that some towns don't have planning commissions. So, the role of the planning commission is to kind of, do a lot of the work ahead of time to, hopefully save you guys time. And going through planning hearings and, researching the various properties that are coming before the council, helping with the update to the general plan. And where did that come from?
It's okay.
And, helping with, like the regional housing needs allocation and identifying those properties, and because that seems to come every, 8 years?
Yeah.
So, those types of things, just basically doing all of that planning work, that, hopefully will save you guys time and,
Terrific.
help you out.
We're going to kind of go, Kevin, I'm going to go to Gabe second for a question. And then if you're interested in the third question, I don't know if you got the list of Planning Commission questions, but Allison can probably forward it to you if it didn't arrive yet.
Yeah, no, I did.
Okay, great.
But I prefer the two of you handle all the questioning because it's just, I think it'll get too confusing.
That's fine.
Up here. And
That's fine.
you especially have had more experience in interviewing planning commission candidates than I have. And so if
All
you
right.
don't, I'll
That's
be
fine.
fairly quiet.
Just speak up if there's something that interests you and you want to ask a question. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'll
Gabe.
raise my hand.
So Tamara, I'm gonna kind of make a little bit of a condensed question here. So we have a general plan, and there's also different philosophies of development. So I'm wondering if you can look at the case of North Magnolia or the case currently of Drake's Landing and tell me what you think is applicable in the general plan and what's applicable in your philosophy of development.
I guess I should have looked at those. So North Magnolia is.
That's the one where we had the
where you get
hearings.
Really like the 4-story.
Yeah,
homes
yeah.
And so on. I think I'm going to take Drake's Landing, because Drake's Landing is the project the property that I would say, me personally, not having a huge knowledge of the history of the general plan and what has come before and what has been identified in the arena numbers in the past. But to me, that seems like a more ideal location for converting office space to housing, and versus maybe a place like, I know that it's commercial down at North Magnolia, but to me, it feels like it's much more there's a lot more issues there to address because there's so much more housing that's nearby. And the impact seems like it would be greater than it would at Drake's Landing. So, and I know that Drake's Landing is in the general plan as the office. I think what's called administrative and office is a subcategory. So to me, that's where the most opportunity is. I would look at that in places like Larkspur Landing.
Let me paraphrase that. That was a little bit overloaded.
Make sure
So,
the mic's on.
yeah, so what is your understanding or knowledge of the general plan? And, what, a stance do you think a planning commissioner should take in looking at projects like that?
Well, my understanding of the general plan is that you guys already have, zoning for various, every area, every property has
Mhm.
some sort of zoning on it. And so looking at, say, a Drake's Landing, if it's going to be, looked at as a potential housing, then there's got to be a zoning change and so on. And so, the planning commissioner, I mean, if Drake's Landing came to the planning commission as a project and I was a planning commissioner, I would want to take all the information that's presented, but then also go and visit the site myself and, see what, the possibilities are, see what, if there's any variances that are required, see how it fits into, being converted to housing and fit in with the general plan. But zoning changes would be the end result.
Okay, great. Thank you.
One of the things the planning commission often has to do is make decisions in which neighbors disagree with each other on something. A building is too tall, or they don't like the look of feel, and there's a lot of movement between neighbors as far as conversation and and sometimes disagreements. Have you worked in situations where people had to disagree with each other and come up with a resolution? And as a volunteer, you're going to have to do that very often.
Yeah, as a volunteer, so years ago, I chaired an ad hoc group that looked at the Northgate Mall in San
Oh,
Rafael
right.
back in early 2000s. And the mall had approached the city of San Rafael and said that they wanted to take buildings down, and the city wanted to have a permanent space for a police station, substation. They wanted to do a bike lane and improvements and, a lot of, pathways and bike to school routes and so on. And the mall didn't want to do that, but they wanted to tear down the space between what was then Mervyn's and the main mall, and it's now been torn down. And then a lot of the community wanted to see housing built there. And so the group that I chaired, we basically we did a lot of community outreach and discussions with the mall, and to give everybody the opportunity to have their opinion and try to find the compromise. And ultimately, they got the compromise with the stipulation that if they built any other spaces over 50,000 square feet, which the new Home Goods, it's new now, but the Home Goods site was new addition, and it's just under the 50,000 square feet. So they knew how to skirt the rules exactly to the agreement that the city ended up entering in with them about, future housing. So.
Since we'll probably have one more question, is there one more that you have, or should I close with a
Why don't you
question?
close it?
So, there's the time commitment for planning commission is 2 meetings, a month, which is a large volunteer commitment, plus extra meetings when there are large projects that come on. Are you aware of that time commitment and feel comfortable with your professional and personal life to do that?
I am. I have the ability to set my own hours as a relatively self-employed person. I mean, I co-own a CPA firm, but even during tax season, I make the time, and if it's something that I've committed to or is important to me. And I also expect that it's going to take additional time to do, my own site visits or group site visits, to look at the property. So it's not just sitting in the meetings,
Right.
twice a month.
Right.
I'm aware of that.
Great. And to close, anything else you want to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, I've just done a lot of volunteer work over the years. And, some of it has been related to housing elements, it's pretty involved in between the Sierra Club and some of the sustainable groups like Sustainable Marin and Sustainable San Rafael when we did the 2008 plan.
Mm.
And I actually got appointed to an ad hoc committee by the county supervisors where we had to go around the community development agency had identified potential sites, and we all had to go out and review them and critique them and give our recommendations. And it's definitely was my big, deep education into the housing element of the
Good.
county general plan. And I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of housing element and general plans, and can also translate that into English for those who don't understand.
Great. What year was that?
2007.
Okay. All right, thank you. And thank you for your flexibility. I'll
you.
thank everybody for that tonight with our power outages, et cetera.
Thanks, Tim.
You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. Jane, you're Jane, right? Yes. I think you're next in our list. Thank you. How do you pronounce Jane Gusby? Grusby. Thank you, Jane. Yeah. So I'm Catherine Way, the vice mayor, taking the lead tonight because of quorum. Gabe Paulson.
Hi.
And Kevin Carroll is on Zoom. He's also a council member, and you heard him say earlier that he'll be listening, but if he wants to jump in, he'll ask questions. So great. And I see you live on Via Casita in Greenbrae. Great. And it said you were a retired real estate broker. So you're in New York. I saw that. You did a little parentheses, New York. Yeah.
But lived in Tiburon before this.
Oh, you did? Okay, great. So you heard a few of the questions, and sort of what we want to do is just get to know you a little better and see if you're familiar with what this role is and what some of your experiences with Larkspur's development standards, et cetera, are.
Right.
So,
And I know this area, as well as every other area, is looking for housing.
yeah. What do you think about that? And where do you see housing happening in Marin? I mean, in Larkspur?
Well, I think it has to happen not centrally. I mean, where you're talking about where the gas station is and the supermarket was, I think that's a good site. I know the people there would love another supermarket downstairs, but I think that area is great. I mean, if another area could be used by where the library is going to be up. And if you go across the highway, there's plenty of space there. I know they had considered right next to me, the Tamalpais. But in speaking.
You
I
mean
don't
the
think-
Tamalpais, the high rise?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
where I'm the building right next to.
Oh, I
that.
see.
And I don't think people realize that when you were talking about that and they were considering different areas, that they were taking away the parking spots. Which we need desperately. I mean, downtown, the only place that we have to park is really across the street from the theater.
Yeah.
We don't want to lose that because every store will close down in town. There's no other place to park.
So would you like to
Sure.
start with your questions?
Yeah. So, Jane, I'm gonna try to be consistent but maybe a little clearer from the last time. So I'm trying to get a sense for how well you know the planning element, our planning document, and also, we're talking about trying to grow. So rather than talk about North Magnolia or Drake's, let's go specifically to Via Casitas and the parking lot, because I'm familiar with that. And give me some idea of where you think the planning document, what sort of guidance it gives there, and if someone were interested in developing there, how would you see your role, and how would the planning commission try to determine what's the best use for that spot?
Well, I think what they want to do there is put up housing, and I think you need it. I mean, if you want teachers to come into the area, policemen and firemen, everybody that is underpaid in their salaries. Personally, I see some of the money that you have planned for the schools and what you want to do. I know some of the schools need fixing up, but I think the teachers' salaries need to be up also.
So just to clarify, Larkspur does not run the schools. The schools
No,
are
I
not a
know.
financial relationship that we have any control over. They are run separately by a school district. So
Okay,
the schools don't follow within our jurisdiction as far as management or policy setting.
the teachers.
None of that
none of
does.
that. It's all separate.
Right. It's all
Okay.
separate within Marin.
I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
Have you seen the planning document, and the housing element and circulation element?
I've seen some of it. I haven't seen all of it.
So back to that area, like, let's say we have a developer who wants to build, 35 units.
Mhm.
and this has come before you and your planning commissioner, what do you see as your role? How would you try to, try to make a determination or a recommendation?
Well, wouldn't they have to follow the standards of what the people coming in, what they could pay? Don't you have to do the 20%, 40% as far as
So we do have,
being able to afford?
we do have some requirements from the state for opportunity sites for a certain specific number of housing units in all spectrums from very low income, et cetera. So that is
Right.
what
That's
you're
part of it,
discussing. Yeah,
yes.
that's part of it.
I think you would have to stay with that,
Mhm.
depending on the builders that you get that would try and get the sites. I think you would have to really point out that you want to get some of these people in there that can't afford
Mhm.
other areas in the area. I also feel the rent and that whole bill that's going through. The people that can't afford Larkspur right now are not going to be able to afford it in 1 year or 2 years. Because if the rents start going up, they still can't afford it. I think you need to almost work with the state and try and get some housing in here that they would subsidize. And that way you get people in where the rents wouldn't go up.
Mhm. So when you saw the planning commission opportunity, what strengths do you think you can bring as a planning commissioner?
Well, being in real estate for 35 years, I've worked with people.
Mm.
I know you have to get back to the millennials within 5 minutes and text them and not call them an hour later. And you have to be flexible.
Yeah.
Flexible with your schedule that you can go out, meet them, talk to them, show them the area, what we have to offer.
And in real estate, were you in situations in which you had individual property owners who may be in disagreement with each other about a development prospect?
Sure. I think you have that in every area. I think it's you have this right here in Mill Valley and Tiburon, no one wants change. And it's trying to work with these people to say you're living in a community with different people. Give it a chance, show the differences, show where it could possibly help them
Mhm.
and improve the area. We're in a world where it's changing
Yeah.
and you can't stay in one little area and hope that nothing changes.
And if you were to do a planning commission role as we're volunteers, we're essentially volunteers too. What do you see the relationship between the planning commission and the paid city staff to be? Like, who would you work with and what would be your role with them?
Well, it depends. I also think with the building department, I think you would have to work stronger. I have a question about that.
Sure.
In the building department, if you have somebody that comes in with plans, they're redoing their whole place.
Mhm.
A licensed contractor comes in and says, I'm gonna apply for the
permit to-
permits for it and all that. They get them. Are they required to have a licensed electrician and a licensed plumber? Or because it's under the construction person's license, they don't have to? And then is it checked by the city? I'm finding different areas because being in Tiburon, it's one thing, being in San Rafael, it's something else. And in New York, it's totally different. But it seems here that you don't. Am I wrong?
So that's a little above my pay grade, but that would be something that the city staff, who would be our community services director.
I mean, I
Would
got the
be-
feeling, and because I came to the building department and spoke to them,
Mm.
and I got the feeling that if the contractor is licensed, he takes this on his shoulders. And he doesn't necessarily need a licensed plumber or a licensed electrician.
Well, that would be a role that the city staff would work through, but a planning commissioner would not necessarily be involved in checking licensure.
Yeah, but I think safety wise, somebody from the town
Mhm.
should go over and check that things
Yeah.
are done the way they should be done.
We have inspectors and building inspectors
I
and
know that.
yeah,
But if they don't necessarily have to take out permits for each of these, like for plumbing or for electrical.
I'm pretty sure they do, but let's move on to a different
Okay.
question that's more for the role that we're looking for planning commission.
Yeah, I'll go to your other question about time commitment. How's your,
I'm open,
yeah,
retired,
okay.
married, my husband, a doctor in the area, cardiologist. Started the Marin Cardiology Group
I saw
years
that
ago.
I saw that in your recommendation. I
Half
mean,
the
in
people
your
in the
references.
area know him.
Half the people have had their heart looked at by him. Yeah. How do you think you deal, there's often times when it can be very stressful in the planning commission when there are members of the community, excuse me, who come to meetings, maybe having heard something that may be inaccurate or incorrect, or are concerned about a plan that the planning commission is looking at. How do you handle those kind of situations?
I think you have to try and sit down with them individually and explain what it is and find out what they think is going on. I had this with a neighbor. With the TAM, when they got the notice, the way it came out. Looking at different sites, one thought that the Tamalpais was gonna build. I mean, it came out not very clearly what was going
Mhm.
on. And I think you just need a little more patience sitting and speaking with them.
Okay, anything else you want to tell us about yourself that for your role for planning commission?
Nope, I am who I am.
Well, we appreciate you coming tonight, and we appreciate your flexibility with our power outages and our problems with our
You're welcome.
meetings schedule. You're welcome to stay, and you're welcome to. And Kevin, was there anything you wanted to add before we leave? All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Jane.
Hi, Lana. You're next. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
And for those who are just joining us in the room or not, we are doing planning commission interviews tonight, and we are going to return to our regular meeting as soon as the planning commission interviews are over. Due to some power outages, we had to start a little later. So great, nice to see you.
Thank you.
You're all around these
Yeah.
days. So great. So we got your application, and you've been sitting through the process.
Mhm.
Tell us why you are put your name in the application pool for planning commission.
I happened to look through the nine departments under the council. And I did come across an opening at the planning commission. I have an interest. I've read the housing elements and I have the time. I live in Larkspur and am concerned about what happens in the town. And that's primarily why I applied.
So I was a little perplexed, I'll have to be honest with you, because you're one of the three candidates for the city council seat on the March ballot.
Mhm.
So it sort of, it was, when I saw your name, I thought you're already running for city council. So how,
Okay, and may I interrupt?
sure.
And I think when you're on the council, you have to have 2 or 3 committee or commission appointments.
No, so planning commission is a separate a group of individuals who are appointed by the city council, but we don't overlap with them. So there are city council members who are liaisons to the different commissions, but they
Okay.
don't sit on those commissions.
Okay,
So was that one of the reasons why you thought that planning commission was something you were interested in?
correct. I
Okay.
mean, I thought if I happen to be on the council, this may be a commission I'd want to be on.
Oh, okay. So that's a little different.
Yeah.
So where should we continue going along with this in case, I'm
Well,
a little perplexed though, because you still are on the ballot for the March election. So this would be an appointment prior to that. March ballot, excuse me, which would be an appointment prior to the March ballot.
So can I do both?
Can't do both.
You can't do both.
No.
Um,
It's all right. I love the enthusiasm. I'm just saying.
uh,
So,
Sometimes it feels like you're doing both.
yeah, sometimes it does feel like you're doing
That's,
both.
yeah.
so,
So it's yes, so since you are on the ballot for the March election to fill the
Right.
seat from Councilmember Haroff, it's might be a little premature to do a Planning Commission.
Okay, and there are commission seats coming up, I think, this
Yes,
year.
in June.
Yeah.
In June, there are 3 planning commissioners whose term expires, and we don't know yet if they are going to re-up for that role.
Okay,
But there will be other opportunities, so.
okay,
Uh,
all right.
I mean, I love seeing you here and I love your enthusiasm,
Well, thank you.
but it's
okay.
a very different, and I think just for the benefit of the public, I'll explain too, that each city council member has an assignment of committees to be mostly to be a liaison to countywide committees or to citywide committees. And one of our primary committees is Planning Commission.
Mhm,
And so one of the council members will sort of interact with them. but
Right,
It's entirely separate decision-making, policy makers, and roles that they have.
okay.
So,
Okay, well, I guess that settles.
well,
it.
it's wonderful to see you. And then I also just, for your own information, I noticed in your application, you mentioned that the malls, the village and town center malls and just to be clear, those are Corte Madera's property. We don't have no
Wait,
jurisdiction.
what did I,
We-
going there?
Yeah, we have
yeah,
no jurisdiction over those
Right,
2
right.
malls. So,
Right,
yeah.
I guess I wasn't thinking.
It's all right.
of that, yeah. Well, I was thinking Green Brae.
Wait, sit down so they
Bon
can see you better on the camera.
Air. I was thinking, I think Green Brae.
Yeah.
and Bon Air.
But since you're here and we have a few extra minutes, I'll plug the city council candidate debate next Tuesday in Green Bay at the community room. And Lana will be there and the other 2 council member candidates. So,
Larkspur Landing Circle.
yes,
correct. Yeah,
yes.
so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Well, you're welcome and best of luck in March. And if that doesn't work out, then come back to us.
Okay, thank you.
Oliver, are you here? Oh, wonderful. Thank you for being here. Oliver Sloan. Great. Just to sort of introduce myself, I'm Catherine Way. I'm the vice mayor and this is Gabe Paulson. And our council member Kevin Carroll is on Zoom right here, but we will be mostly asking the questions, but he can step in if should he have one. Our mayor, Scott Candell, is recused because of a work relationship he has with one of the candidates. So we do that. So welcome and thank you for the flexibility tonight to switch around. We have power outages and technical issues and quorum issues. So great. So got your application. First of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you saw the Planning Commission opening and chose to put your name forward?
I've lived in Larkspur for 3.5 years.
Welcome.
Bounced from San Francisco during the start of coronavirus. Lived in the marina in San Francisco for 8 years. Obviously, you can tell, but I wasn't born in California. I met my wife at NYU in 2009. She's now my wife, obviously then my girlfriend. She's from here. Her family lives in Ross. She's actually got a brother who lives in Larkspur.
So you came back to the best place.
Well, her family actually grew up in Sacramento, but she grabbed me from. I moved back to London after New York. I worked for a politician in Parliament. I worked as a PR person then for hedge funds, private equity, and then she dragged me over here. We went like that from anyway. Moved here, PR, law school, then moved to Marin and operated a small business for a while, and now I work in real estate.
Great. Well, having been new to our community, it's great to see that you're stepping forward to get involved in one of the most important roles, other than city council. The second important role, in my opinion, is planning commission. So thank you for doing that. I'll have Councilmember Paulson start off our questions.
Yeah, so kind of the same question I've been asking. How familiar are you with the Larkspur planning? The document, the general plan, and also to use a case study wherever you want. It could be downtown where we might have new construction, or it could be Drake's Landing or North Magnolia, or up in Via Casitas on Bonnier Hill. what would your approach be? So, given the Larkspur planning document and given the role of a planning commissioner, how would you deal with, a kind of negotiation between people who live there and developers and the community in general?
Well, the reason I think I was intrigued to come and apply for this position was my neighbor's concerns with a lot of development that's been planned out by the city. I am not I don't know it like the back of my hand. I've been hacking my way through the housing element today and trying to read up on what's going on. I would take an approach that the residents do take priority, I think, and the concerns. It's important to keep sort of the economy flowing through. Obviously, developers are important, but from my position, from what people tell me, what they want, what they complain about, Magnolia becoming a car park.
Yeah.
That's certainly I sort of be a constituent-centric approach to how I would, obviously the negotiation, I'd be amenable to all, I'd be very reasonable in terms of everyone has an interest. Obviously you have to keep up with what the state mandates and the county, but yeah, I mean, my first priority would be to not just homeowners, the residents, and then start from there.
Could just ask one
Sure.
follow-up question. I didn't ask last time, but what do you see as the role of state law?
I could crack a joke, but no,
Go for it.
well, I mean, it's a superseding thing. I mean, you have to, for a city this size, I think it's important to abide by it, not to try and go back and forth or how some of the other towns I hear are going about getting around some of the housing issues that they face, Tehran or Ross. So, I mean, state law really is gospel. So it's not like I'm looking, and I'm not looking to try and put the city in any type of litigation or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, I don't really know what else to say except for it's been paramount.
We have a lot of rules we follow under that
Cool.
they change all the time from Sacramento.
Yeah.
You're, as a relative newcomer, 3.5 years, although long family relationship here, what are some projects you see in Larkspur that you like, and what are some that you don't, and why?
Projects and policies, or just?
Or just projects, I mean, development projects.
Yeah. I think Drake's Landing's a really good opportunity for Larkspur.
Opportunity in what way?
To develop the city, to develop housing, to develop income, to improve the economy. Obviously the affordable bit of it, a good place for the housing density. Obviously from my house on West Baltimore, everyone complains about what's going to happen with Lucky. I certainly think that the scope for this, there is scope for units there, though what concerns people is that how many. Also the knock-on effect on schools, other services. But it isn't exciting. I mean, in terms of planning, it's exciting. This is prime real estate, really. So what the city has a great opportunity to really keep Larkspur charging forward. And I think Larkspur's a great town. So I'm not the more development, but the ways we can improve it should be maximized.
So although we do have large projects that come every once in a while, and but the majority of what the planning commissioners do are work with residents and general home single family residences and things like that, in which someone wants to do a project on a single family lot, and they work with those homeowners and developers and architects for those things. Oftentimes it leads to conflict between neighbors. You've already mentioned a couple of opportunities in which you've heard people express some dissatisfaction with certain things. Have you been in situations where you've had to then mediate between the expectations and needs of two different parties?
In terms of a real estate transaction or a real estate relationship,
Not necessarily real estate relationship, but let's say I want to put in a house with 2 stories next to someone who has a single family home and they're saying, no, single story, you can't do it. And they petition for a change to my plan.
well. I mean. Obviously, it would depend. I mean, from looking at the YouTube videos, like the development on Magnolia that overlooks the where it's called like 2-lane.
No, North Magnolia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. People complain they can see it over that fence.
Yeah.
A home, I mean, in a situation like what you're describing, a homeowner. These definitions, because I'm very pro like multi-unit. I think that's the best way to really build out the population here, rather than like stack on build millions of units if there's large buildings that can be turned into. But yeah, I mean, to say if it was my house and the person next door wanted to turn it into Buckingham Palace, I think the planning commission would have to take a scope of the street, of the reasonable person standard of what all the neighbors would think, and not just allow people to build as much as possible. I mean,
We have standards.
of course, I
Yeah.
grew up in a 1,000-year house in England, 1,000-year-old house in England. Literally can't do anything to it. But
Ours are from the 1970s
yeah,
and you still
I
can't do
think
anything to them.
my council, but the character of the towns, I think, is
Okay.
one of the most important things.
So in closing, anything else you want to tell us about you? And why, and what your role in planning commission you imagine it to be?
My role in the planning commission is really just to keep Larkspur, just the economy going, keeping everyone happy, developers, contractors, all saying all tide riders or boat riders or whatever, but I have a vested interest in Larkspur. I have a child.
Great.
I go to Marin Primaries in August, and I was pregnant again. We're going to be here for a long time. I didn't want to live in Larkspur. I live somewhere else.
Great.
So I'm trying to cut back on some. I've got a lot of other commitments I'm trying to get rid of, and I would love to just have my one extracurricular activity to be the Larkspur Planning Commission.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. And I really appreciate you stepping forward to do this.
Okay, thank you.
Jonathan. Thank you, Oliver. Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for your patience. As you see, we've had some technical difficulties and some power outages, and so we're a little moved people around a little.
Right, all right.
So I'm serving in this role tonight because the mayor has to recuse himself due to a work relationship with one of the applicants. So we take our roles very seriously that way.
Understood.
Kevin Haroff is on, not Kevin, pardon me, Kevin, sorry, Kevin Carroll is on Zoom, so he's available. So there's 3 of us here. Yeah, and he has allowed the questions to come here, but we will. And now you're on library, on the Library
I am on the
Foundation.
library. I'm in my 5th year serving on the library board.
Great,
Past 2 years as chairman, but I'm no longer chairman, but still a director through 27.
great. So we start by asking, you saw the Planning Commission had an opening. Why did you choose to step forward?
A few reasons, and some from serving on the library board. But there were similar reasons. I've lived here now with my wife and our 10-year-old son for 8 years. And I love Larkspur. I think this town is special. I felt like we got so lucky when we were able to buy a house here.
You're on
years ago.
William, I see. Yeah,
Yep, on William Ave, 3 blocks in right here
Yeah.
next to Perry's, walking distance to the high school, to all the schools. Our son has been at NPMS and then Neil Cummins since kindergarten. And I love the community and I want to give back. I want to participate and I want to help. And I also have enjoyed greatly learning about how a community functions. I lived in San Francisco for 24 years prior to moving here. Very different.
It
I was
is.
not involved at all, volunteering or participating. I've greatly enjoyed it and I just want to go deeper.
Great. Thank you. Gabe?
Yeah, hey, Jonathan. So kind of the same question, how well you know the planning document, and let me, I keep tweaking it, but what is your sense of, the objectives of the planning document and your role as a commissioner in interpreting that, with different projects that come up like Drake's Landing or
Yep.
anything we've been talking about?
Okay, it's nuanced. The role of the document, I think the document's a guidepost
Mhm.
and it articulates facts, parameters, principles, policies to be followed, to be interpreted, and to be used to maximize the outcome and the goals of the community, which are multifaceted. You have resident, you have commercial. We must be in compliance. I know there are consequences, and so it is the guide for that.
And then, if you have a project, how do you work as a commissioner? And let me just throw in the other question I asked about state law. How does state law factor into this?
State law, I also see as a guidepost, with also with consequences. And it's to be understood in detail. It can be complex. As you mentioned, it's constantly changing.
Mhm.
So it is a living document. It requires work to stay up to date on. And like perhaps many rules, there's a time and place to push back, and knowing when that is and understanding the stakes, but otherwise understanding those parameters, working within them. And it's empowering. I know you didn't ask this, but a role of a commissioner, in my view, includes education, communication, and advocacy for principles. Another reason why I'm interested in this is I'm a resident and I plan on staying here. My wife and our son, we love it here. We see living here as long as we can imagine. And I want to help the community thrive, and that's people and commercial. And to do that, you got to play within the rules, or maybe, push against them and understand interests of this very diverse and varied community and try to represent it. And as a member, I can speak from the heart on that.
Great.
So the one, as volunteers, the planning commission are volunteers, a very significant volunteer role within
Yes.
the future direction of Larkspur. How do you see if you were to be a planning commission, your interaction with staff and what their role is in implementing the policies that we've,
City council staff,
the city staff?
city,
So like our director of community development and the planners and
Elise,
yeah.
Alex, Jackie, incredible resources to be learned from, called upon, both sounding boards, maybe, discuss. I would imagine on the early part of the learning curve, I would have a lot of questions and a lot of back and forth with them. And I mean, ultimately, I think it's collaborative because everybody wants the same thing, but my understanding is the commission makes a recommendation or has a ruling, then appeals go to council. So different times in the process, but on the same side.
Yeah. So one of the things that planning commissioners often get are neighbors who disagree with each other about things, or they come with a lot of maybe misinformation about something that they read on Nextdoor or other things about a planning or potential planning issue. How do you see dealing with conflict?
First, with respect, because usually somebody who's passionate, even if misinformed or different information that might not have been accurate, that's wonderful that they care. I saw a lot of that at the December 12th
Yeah.
meeting of a lot of voices there. And I appreciated how the current commission handled so much of it, acknowledging first and then perhaps correcting misinformation, which is all, that would be my style as well, to make sure the right facts are understood, the information is accurate, and then get to the sentiment and the root
Mhm.
and address it.
Good. Yeah, that was a challenging, that was definitely a challenging meeting. So,
Yes.
and I give kudos, one of our planning commissioners is here and I give her a lot of
Yeah.
kudos for managing that, that situations.
Mhm.
So, in closing, is there something else you want to tell us about yourself and why you would think, you think you're the right fit for what we need right now? What
I-
Larkspur needs right now?
Yeah, well, I like to serve. I've demonstrated that with the library.
And it's going to be a great library.
Yes, I mean, it's exciting. And I've participated in other ways. I've coached soccer teams as my son was younger. I've volunteered, I've attended a lot of things. And I'm a startup guy. I mean, my career has been in building companies where something about it is innovative. But there's also a role of being an arbiter of very passionate and disparate needs, voices, demands, constraints. And I think that translates very well to the conflicts and the competing interests that, make up all the housing projects here and the multifacets to them. So I'm just interested in it.
Great.
And I love it here. So I want to make this
Thank you.
town as good as it can.
Yeah, and I haven't said this to all the others, but I should have, is that please keep your keep your passion and interest, because even if it, for some reason, it doesn't work out for this role, there are all sorts of opportunities in the years ahead and the months ahead to participate. And we want everyone who has expressed interest, and we have one spot, but who've expressed interest to still stay interested and be active with Larkspur, because we need good people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Nikki? Oh, is that you? Great. Wonderful. You- Nice to meet you. Nikki Collins.
Yes,
Great. Nicolay. I wasn't sure if that was a,
Nicolay,
yeah.
yes, yeah. Nikki's easier, so go with that.
that's great. Thank you. So we introduced ourselves and once again, thank you for your patience. You've been here over this last hour, so you've heard me say
No,
that. So
they told me to come at 7.
yeah, you're great.
So
Yeah,
We changed it up at the last minute, which was fine.
perfect.
It was quite a day.
It was, my power
Yeah.
was out, power was out here,
Everybody-
so,
yeah.
so as I'm the vice mayor and serving in this role tonight because the mayor had to recuse himself. And Gabe Paulson and then Kevin Carroll is on Zoom, who's another council member. I don't know if you can see him,
Yeah.
but he's there. Oh, can you,
I
oh, the
think
screen
that's
went
done.
blank.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
died maybe.
The
too.
screen was blank,
That's
but
okay. That's
believe
all
me,
right.
he's there. So, oh,
Okay.
he's there too,
Oh.
look. Great, I didn't even see that. So, just so you know, there's 3 of us that are here, so, great, so, it looks like you're on Marina Vista.
Yeah. The locals like to call it Christmas Tree Hill.
Oh, okay, yeah, I was looking at that, and I thought I knew every name, every street, so you're on the very lower end of Christmas Tree Hill.
Well, I feel like we're at the top. It kind of plateaus.
Oh,
That's where 160 is.
okay,
Yeah,
but that's all, that, part of that is Corte Madera.
that's right. We're right at the edge.
You're right on the
In
border.
fact, interestingly enough, our power line ends right at our house, and then there's a new set of power lines. So sometimes,
Yeah.
our neighbors will have power and vice versa.
That's the jurisdictions in Marin.
Yeah.
They're very amorphous like
Yeah.
that. So, well, tell us why you saw the opportunity and why did you decide to put an application in to be commissioner?
My first thought is to say that there must be something wrong with me. But I'm at a point now where I am somewhat of an empty nester. I have adult children who went all the way through the Larkspur, Corte Madera public schools. And I've lived here for almost 30 years in the same location.
Uh-huh.
And have just been really frankly too busy working mom to do something like
Sure.
this. And, I've done other things in the community, but not something like this. And it occurred to me when I saw the opening that, well, I kind of do have some time now that I didn't have before in my life. And this is something that I have a lot of experience with in my career.
Mm.
So it felt like maybe it would be a good match for me.
And what do you see the role of the planning commission in Larkspur?
I would like to see a planning commission that the community sees as a helpful, responsive body
Hmm.
that is there to listen and to be a source of guidance and often mediators.
You've heard that question I've
Yeah,
asked.
I mean, it's inevitable. Anyone who's ever been to a meeting, either just to observe or as an applicant, knows that the stakes feel very high for people.
Mhm.
And so it's inevitable that sometimes emotions, run hot and it happens. But I do think it's important that, again, that the body is seen as an objective body that is there to help everyone to often just to understand really what the issues are and to not feel that it's personal, but that we all are we're living under the same guidelines and now even more importantly, state
Mhm.
guidelines are playing a bigger role. So,
Uh,
Yeah, I'll keep the same question for comparison purposes. So
Sure.
I've been asking all the other applicants about, their familiarity with planning documents and, I'll be a little more specific, things like the housing element and design standards and let me, just add another, like, how many planning meetings have you attended? Where there've been discussions like, there
Yeah.
was here on December 12th.
So
whatever.
it's been, several, but it's been many years, and that's in Larkspur. So I haven't attended a meeting, during COVID, I maybe watched one or two on Zoom. I have to admit, I'll do the Zoom meeting, but I'm an in-person kind of person. I feel that we really get something out of in-person meetings. And yeah, so prior to COVID, I can't remember the last time I was in here in person, maybe when I was an applicant to do an addition
Ah,
on my
okay.
home. And so most of the council and planning meetings that I've been involved with in the last 20 years have been in other parts of the Bay Area. Yeah.
So in your years living in Larkspur, what are some of the projects that you think are great examples of what we could build in Larkspur, and what do you think are not?
I have no complaints.
Oh, okay.
I think that we've done a good job. And I think you can't please everyone all the time.
Mm.
And there are certainly going to be aspects of every development that someone will find offensive. But I can't say that I've seen anything where I felt like, well, that was a huge mistake. Moving forward, there will be challenges because, of course, with the newer state laws,
Mhm.
there's going to be more development.
Mhm.
But I think that, again, will we all love all of those projects? I doubt it. Highly doubt it.
Yeah.
But it's going to happen. And so we do ourselves a favor by knowing what's coming and doing our best to accept that fact gracefully and work with each other to come up with solutions.
Can I ask a follow-up
Sure.
question?
Yeah.
So on that note,
Yeah.
let's say on Christmas Tree Hill,
Yeah,
a neighbor wants to do an addition and another one says, you're blocking my view or you can look into my place. So you said most developments, you're okay with them. Under what conditions would you deny approval?
well, I think, again, in the interest of remaining objective as humanly possible, I don't think that it would be my goal to deny an applicant what they're asking to do unless they are clearly outside of what the law allows for. Just having your neighbor not like what you're going to do is in itself not enough. And it is not our role to act on behalf of just that neighbor. It is our role to help everyone to interpret the existing laws. And I think often as I've seen the previous discussions go, that there can be different interpretations.
Yeah.
Of course. And to add a level of complexity, of course, people often ask for variances. And that's where it can be increasingly difficult to remain objective and fair and apply the law equally
Right.
across all of our community. So it can be tricky, but my goal would be to help everyone to feel that we as citizens have put in place the laws that we all hope to abide
Mhm.
by.
And the guidelines.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Nikki. And really appreciate your flexibility in coming late because we were originally supposed to be at 5 o'clock.
That's
So,
okay. My pleasure.
yeah. And you're welcome to stay and, or you can depart, but, we really appreciate you
How
putting
many
forward.
more?
We have one more gentleman, one more person.
Okay.
So, I mean, we had 7 applicants, which was phenomenal for us. So
Yeah, that's great.
you'll hear from us, but please, regardless of what happens, please stay actively involved in what we're doing. We have a large library and community center project that we all need to participate with. So thank you.
Okay, thanks.
And our last interview is Reed Baxter, please. You've heard my thanks to everyone. You know Gabe Paulson and myself, and Kevin Carroll is here on the screen.
Hey, Kevin. Hope you're feeling better.
Yeah. And we have about 10 minutes and then we're gonna have to launch into our regular scheduled meeting. So
All right.
thank you. I have to admit, I was a little surprised to see your name because I had just mentioned to you that I thought our applications were closed, but saw you're here, so
Yep.
we're gonna talk.
Thank you.
I think it's something that I'll follow through with about how we better communicate what our application deadlines and stuff are, because I didn't even know, I wasn't clear on them. So great. So as you saw, Scott's not here because he works with one of the candidates in
Yeah.
a regular professional manner, so recused himself. What do you see yourself in the role of planning commission, and why did you choose to put your name forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think kind of the role of the commission, facilitate discussions, enforce code, arbitrate disagreements, and kind of research and create guidelines, somewhat like the general plan, and make sure that we are adhering to that. I put my name forward, I guess, for several reasons. One, I've been a 20-year resident of Larkspur. Two, my day-to-day job is the redevelopment of Larkspur, and its economic vitality is close to my heart, and making sure that we're continually evolving as a community and that we can meet the diverse needs of Larkspur. I think, as a part of my day-to-day job, I get to work with the planning department. I get to work with Elise and Jackie. I get to work with planning departments in other cities and other counties and learn about their processes, their plans, what the latest and greatest is out of Sacramento. And I think through that experience, I'd be able to contribute quite a bit at the Planning Commission here in Larkspur.
Great. And so, I asked the same question over and over, but I, know that a lot of the insides of the planning department and, our documents. So let me go to the first time I asked, it was a case study, like say North Magnolia, which I know you're well aware, and, Drake's Landing, which is close to Bonnier where you work. What are your thoughts about, what is the best for the community? How would your role on the planning commission, contribute to that goal?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a significant volume of analysis that we can draw on to say what's best for the community. We have aging seniors. We have a huge demographic of 65 and up. Housing is important. We need to create more affordable housing. This is all kind of laid out in the general plan. So I think my role as a commissioner is to ensure that our development aligns to that general plan, which carries Larkspur into 2040.
Okay.
Uh,
And specifically like going to North Magnolia, since I think you're aware with that, how,
Yeah.
how would you kind of, a little bit of Monday Night Football, how would you review that decision and your thoughts about the opinions? And the
Yeah,
findings?
absolutely. I think I would take a fact-based approach. I mean, it's really challenging because there's state law that we come up against all the time. And, maybe what's best for our community isn't something that Sacramento is going to agree with per se. And I think it's understanding those codes, empathizing with our local constituents, but also pointing to the specific plans that we have here and the ones that we are governed by at a state level. I think basically going back to the verbatim laws and highlighting those.
Okay.
It's kind of the best approach.
I've asked this one of other people. We often, planning commissioners, they do look at large projects like our
Yeah.
library and community center and something else, but they're often just house to house to house projects that a homeowner wants to redevelop their home, add a second story, whatever. And there are potential conflicts between neighbors or between community members around that project that they bring to the planning commission and want to have a resolution in their favor as opposed to what the homeowner wants to do. How do you handle those kind of conflicts?
Yeah, absolutely. I get the joy of those conflicts
All the
every
time,
day,
probably.
and to the point that my hair's falling out. But I would say consistency is key. Empathy is a great way to start, but what you do for one, you should do for everybody else. And part of that is also, I think, spelled out in the code, and there's a well-established precedence for these things. Whether it's tree trimming, whether it's elevating houses to a certain pitch, whether it's building on a slope.
Because it can get pretty personal it gets personal sometimes to us, but it can get definitely personal to planning commissioners because it's someone's personal residence and that just we need to make sure people are aware that they will be having to navigate some interesting dialogue and community conflict. So, but it sounds like you're pretty familiar with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some projects you like in Larkspur and what are some you think are out of character?
Yeah, there's actually two really great projects I'm a fan of. There's Oak Hill out by San Quentin.
Which isn't
Two-
our jurisdiction.
Not
but-
quite our jurisdiction, but 250 houses coming into our proximity right off Larkspur Landing. I think that's great. I wish they had higher density. I think the other one, also not quite our jurisdiction, but I think it is a good model for Larkspur. It fits our general plan. It fits our demographic, is Vivillon in San Rafael. It takes care of aging seniors. I think that's something that I'd like to see more of. One of the monthly things I do is ICSC, and we look at joint development between retail and
What's ICSC?
housing. International Community of Shopping Centers.
Oh, okay.
So it's, looking at trends both regionally and across the country. And, the challenge for developers is that when you mixed, you lose like 20% of your revenue because you're doing that. So I'm not sure that's the best model for some of the areas that I've seen called out. I've seen that tossed around in conversations in this room and planning commissions, and I think it might be in the general plan. I'm
Is it?
not 100% certain. I don't think it says mixed use. I think it's a little bit more
Yeah.
generic, but I think that's one thing that I would certainly be cautious of engaging on for our community.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, quick one. So, given, you are really involved in the community and, have, been here and also with the Bon Air group, where do you see, possible conflicts of interest or where might you have to recuse yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll say like the great thing about the general plan, when I changed the use of the space in the shopping center, do you guys know what a haberdashery is?
Uh-huh.
I did not.
We're a little older.
I didn't know what a haberdashery was.
He's almost
But
60.
that's the kind of use that was approved in the previous.
Oh,
plan.
really?
So if you had something that came after that, you're doing traffic studies, you're doing use permits, things like that. The great thing is 90% of the time that I would come in would be for things that were changes of the use of a commercial building or a residential building. So I could recuse myself from those types of things, but I think once the general plan gets approved, there's less and less of that
I think it's 500 feet, isn't it? 500 feet within a radius of material interest that a person elected has or an appointed has.
Yeah,
So I don't, 500 feet from like your primary residence or from when you have a material interest, I
okay,
think is a rule. So great. So this volunteer role is big, is, it's a lot of time. I mean, it's 2 meetings a month, but then it's also additional meetings. And when the new library and community center plan starts to get its approvals, that will first go through planning commission. And there'll be extra meetings that'll be involved in that and extra community events. How do you feel about that for time commitments?
Larkspur's my commitment. I live here, live where I work. I'm not going anywhere. And regardless of what happens here, I'm still gonna play a role in shaping the community. So I'm pretty pumped to get more of it.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
everyone
Thanks,
coming.
Good to see you.
We'll adjourn this special meeting of the Larkspur City Council at 7:40, and we will return in a few minutes once our mayor joins us and begin the regular meeting of the Larkspur City Council. Can we? Hi, welcome back to the regular meeting of the Larkspur City Council on Wednesday, February 7th. We're starting a little late, planning commission interviews. Our mayor will be joining us shortly. And I just will get us going, and when the mayor joins us, he will resume the meeting. So welcome, everyone. We'll take a roll call, please.
Councilmember Carroll,
Here.
Councilmember Paulson.
Here.
Vice Mayor Way.
Here, we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance if you're able. The next item on our agenda, number 2, is public comment. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the council on matters that are not on the agenda? Yes, sir. Please join us and welcome. I will now be turning the gavel over to Mayor Candell. Welcome, sir.
Good evening, Dennis Chilardi, lifelong resident of Larkspur. I want to get on the record, and it does kind of cross over into later parts of the meeting, so if I go too far, stop me, that this council, at the recommendation of the city manager and the city attorney in October of 2019, joined the California Housing Authority Joint Powers Authority, and the council, at the recommendation of the city manager and the city attorney, approved joining the JPA. And in the authorization, it stated that if you join the JPA, that the JPA will issue tax exempt bonds. Further on in the same resolution, fiscal impact, first sentence. There is no fiscal impact to the general fund associated with joining the CalCHA. Goes on to the second sentence saying, if the project is purchased, there will be tax exempt funding. It always given saying, recommended the council to join and issue tax exempt bonds. The issue is relative to this meeting is by joining, the general fund has not received its portion of the Serenity Apartments tax revenue since 2019. In my estimate, it's in excess of $200,000 a year just to the general fund. We're in 5 years, that's $1 million. Later on, you'll be discussing how to allocate reserves, and I'll speak again.
Thank you, sir. Scott, it's all you.
Thank you. Thank you for starting without me. I know we have a lot going on today. More public comment. Come on up.
Reed Baxter, Green Bray. We had a storm this last week. Our hill lost power. Lots of trees fell on power lines. Several cities around the Bay Area have granted exemptions for hazardous tree removal for 6 months up until June or July. I would request that the city council would consider doing this, at least for certain species of hazardous trees, including eucalyptus, gum, acacia, and pine. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment? Okay, seeing none, I will close public comment. Next on our meeting agenda, we have presentations and proclamations, of which we have none. Moving to item number 4, we have approval of the consent calendar. Would anybody like to pull an item from the consent calendar from the council? And Kevin, just want to make sure you have an opportunity. Whenever I say council, I'll try to make sure I'm getting your input and make sure you don't want to say or do anything. Okay, seeing none from council. Anybody here in the room want to pull an item from consent calendar? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
I'll move the consent calendar.
Second. Can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Carroll,
Aye.
Councilmember Paulson,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Way,
Yes.
Mayor Kendall.
Yes. Okay, motion passes. Moving on to item number 5, city manager's report. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to acknowledge and thank our public works crews. They've been working extra hours during these heavy rains. And you know, it's a hold your breath period when we have heavy rains and high tides, which we did have over the last 7 days. So we've fared fairly well, but we're still doing a lot of cleanup of debris. And appreciate everybody's patience as we do that. But they're working hard, and I want to acknowledge that. That's it today, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for our city manager? Seeing none, Mr. City Manager, do I go to the audience for questions for city manager after a city manager's report?
That's up to you, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any questions for the city manager
That are related to the report.
that are related to the report? Correct. Seeing none. Kevin, checking in with you. Anything for city manager? We got to know. Okay, moving on. Next, we have council members' oral reports. Kevin, anything you want to say?
No.
Okay, pulling it back here. Any oral reports that we would like to give?
Sure. I just would like to remind everyone with my flyer here, but that the second city council candidate meet and greet and debate is next Tuesday, February 12th, 13th. At 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. And this time it's sponsored, this last one was sponsored by the Larkspur Chamber of Commerce. And so is this one. And it is in Greenbrae at the community room, which is at Drake's Landing Office Park, 100 Drake's Landing Road, Suite 115. So please come. The 3 candidates, Lana Scott, Claire Paquette, and Stephanie Andre will be there for you all to meet and to ask questions and to listen to their responses to questions from the Chamber of Commerce. That's it.
Thank you very much, Gabe.
Yeah, I'll go very briefly because we have a long meeting and hopefully I'm not stealing thunder from Vice Mayor Way. So from the Marin Wildfire Prevention Agency, that we had the meeting of all the neighborhood response groups on Monday, and the executive director, Mark Brown, was there. And I just found worth reporting, I think the good question is, where are my tax dollars going? And one of them is in the middle of all this rain, and in the winter, we don't think about it, but they're busy getting ready and working way for the next fire season. So we're actually in the 5th cycle, the 5th work plan for the Marin Wildfire Agency prevention. And one of the really major pieces that's good for Larkspur and Greenbrae is the Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break. So that is probably 50% or more than 50% done. And what it is it's a gap in the vegetation. It's not like bulldozers and clear cutting, but it just creates enough space so that crews can get in there. And also the biggest enemy with catastrophic wildfire is flame length. So they're wider than the longest flame lengths, meaning that there's a chance that we save lives and property here. And It's a really major piece of this, and that's a good time. And also with all this rain, it's a good time to do controlled burns. So there's a lot of dead wood, and it's not happening now because there's too much water, but some of this is going on. And lastly, the work plan is, one of the things on the learning curve is trying to prioritize things. Like we know there's home hardening, we know there's vegetation management, we know there's evacuation, and they've created a ranking system for that. So that really what this means is the limited money we have, 20 million for the entire county of Marin, the 17 fire districts, is being used better and better and better. And we still know that we're so far behind. So to me, it's a good example of good government. And I wish I could say the same for Flood Zone 9. But anyway, I just wanted, people to know that this is happening. So that's it for me.
Okay, thank you so much. Due to our dense calendar today, I'm going to reserve my public comment and I'm sorry, my oral report. Then public hearings, we have none.
Did you ask? him?
Oh, yeah, I asked him first, I believe. Kevin, circling back, anything now? Nope, still nothing. Okay. Public hearings, we have none today, which brings us to our plethora of business items. Let us start with business item 8.1, fiscal year 2022-2023 audit of the city's basic financial statement. Can we get a staff report?
Good evening. I'm Emilia Gabrielle, the Administrative Services Director for the City of Larkspur. So this presentation tonight is about the city audit for fiscal year.
And I'm sorry, can I ask you just pull the microphone a little bit closer to
Yeah,
you just because you have a little bit of a
absolutely.
soft voice? Thank you.
Yes. So this presentation is about the city audit for the fiscal year 22-23. So with us tonight, we have Ahmed Badawi, who is a partner with Badawi and Associates CPA firm. He will be doing the presentation for us tonight. Mr. Badawi, can you join us? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. All right.
Good evening. All right. My name is Ahmed Badawi, and I was the audit partner on the City of Larkspur audit. Today, I'll present to you the results of the fiscal year 2023. And if you don't mind, I'll be maybe looking a little bit to the side so I can see which slides I'm on. So what I'm going to cover today, I'll let you know who the engagement team was, what were the deliverables and the scope of our audit, areas we emphasized on during our audit process, provide you a summary of some of the numbers in the financial statements, provide you some of the required communications as your independent auditor, a brief overview of the new accounting standards coming your way, and then also see if you have any questions for me. And feel free, of course, to stop me anytime you do have questions. As far as our engagement team, this was the composition of our engagement team. I was the engagement partner. We had an audit manager and 2 professional staff assigned to the audit. As far as deliverables, we were mainly engaged to provide an opinion on the city's basic financial statements. That also required us to provide a report on our consideration of internal control over financial reporting and on compliance. The city is a recipient of federal funds that requires a compliance audit. We call the single audit. So we provide an opinion on that as well. We perform agreed upon procedures on the GAN limit. That's the appropriation limit. And then finally, communication with the governing body, which is what I'm doing today. As far as areas of primary audit risk, so we identified 3 areas that are pretty much standard in most of our audits. It's just the nature of any audit that those areas would be areas of risk. First one is management override of control. Management is usually the one responsible for designing the control and putting them in place, monitoring them. And they're oftentimes in positions to override them. So we just have to plan our audit in a way that we can reduce this risk to an acceptable level. So we make sure that we assign more experienced staff to more complex areas of the audit. We make sure that we look at everything that management does, from testing the journal entries prepared by management, reviewing estimates that management have developed to make sure they're free of bias, and a variety of other procedures that we perform. Revenues and receivable is another area that auditing standards require us to consider to be a higher risk area. And we rely heavily on confirmations with third parties. So we send confirmations to the county, to the state, to other basically payees that pays the city. We reconcile those amounts to the city's accounting records and make sure that they do reconcile. And then finally, the area of pension and OPEB. OPEB are the retiree medical benefits. Just a dollar amount that is usually involved in those numbers, and the complexity of the calculation, and it requires actuarial reports and so on. So it just makes it an area of focus for us as well. We communicate directly with the auditors of CalPERS. We obtain audit opinion from them. We also test the data that the city submits to the plan. And then finally, we evaluate also the actuarial assumptions and the journal entries that management prepare to record those activities. For the auditor's report, we have issued an unmodified opinion that basically is a clean opinion. The opinion states the standards that we followed, which are the generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. An unmodified opinion means that we believe that the financial statements are fairly stated, that all estimates are reasonable, all disclosures are properly reflected, and that all accounting policies have been consistently applied. Wanted to just give you just a 30,000-foot view of the numbers in the financial statements. So on this slide here, you will see a summary of the city's assets over the last 3 years. Fairly, for the most part, everything is fairly consistent. I would say that we had some increases in prepaid. I believe that there was a payment for Southern Marine Fire that was just paid in advance that belonged to 2024. So that created that increase in prepaid. And there were some addition to CIP, construction in progress, some paving and some other projects. So that's the additions to the capital assets that you're seeing. On the liability side, this is a summary of the city's liabilities. And I would say that the things that are worth mentioning is obviously pension liability. It went from a super funded plan of 10 million last year to a liability of 3 million. And again, we've seen this across the board. It really is the result of first CalPERS lowering their discount rate to 6.9%, and also the performance of the investments during that year. So those two factors have led to increase in pension liabilities in pretty much all of our clients. The other increase is in unearned revenue. I believe there is a library grant and also ARPA funds that were not spent yet. So they are sitting in unearned revenue until they are spent. I think other than that, everything else is fairly consistent. On this slide here is just a summary of the city's equity, which is assets minus liabilities. And we divide that into three main categories. The first one is the net investment in capital assets. And this is really not in a spendable form. This is how much the city invested in streets and roads and buildings and so on. The restricted amounts are the amounts that have legal restriction on them, whether they are grant funds or bond money that are not spent, or gas tax or those types of funds. And then finally, the unrestricted amount are the amount under the council control. This amount is currently deficit. And again, obviously the pension liability and the OPEB liability are a big factor in that deficit.
Yeah, can I, Mr. Vidal, can I
Yes,
ask
sir.
a clarifying question? So from last year, we had a similar discussion where the pension liability is inversely proportional to the discount rate. I think back then, you were saying that just a 1% reduction increases about 9 to 10 million. Is that still about the same ratio? Is that what we're seeing up here?
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to have a slide that shows that the 1% up and down and what the numbers would look like.
Okay.
But yeah, definitely, it's still one of the most significant assumptions. And just to put it into perspective, that last year the discount rate was about 7.15, and this year is about 6.9. So just a quarter of a percentage have made a significant difference in the pension liability.
Okay, thank you.
Can you look at on page 12, this one on the far right? Can you just explain to me the unrestricted, why it's 14, minus 14, and then positive 4, and then minus 6?
Well, so I think if it would be probably more clear if I go to this slide and I
Okay.
will probably explain it. Basically, last year, the city had a negative pension expense that it was very large, like almost like 15 or maybe even more than that, as a negative pension expense. And this year, this is a positive number. So the negative pension expense have made your revenues over expenses higher last year, and then this year is back to normal. So that's the results of the fluctuation in the unrestricted amount that you see.
Could you compare this to other jurisdictions? I mean, is this any to be concerned about? Is this standard, with all the pension obligations that different cities have?
I mean, the city have pre-funded the pension plan, so I would say that the city is definitely more than average as far as the funded status of the plan. I believe that the city have issued debt to pre-fund some of the liability. So as far as city like yourself having a $3 million outstanding liability, that's definitely a lot lower than most of the cities. But is it standard to see the fluctuation in pension expense like this? We have seen this across the board.
Let me ask you another question. Is part of your job here to kind of give us opinions about the finance of the city, or is it basically to just audit and say whether the books make sense and everything is, the 2 + 2 = 4, everything's been done correctly on the mathematical side?
Mostly on the latter one. Our job is to really report or to make sure that the city is reporting the transactions that has occurred and that they were reported in accordance with the accounting standards that are in place.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, we look maybe for the next 12 months to see that the city have sufficient liquidity and assets to pay for this liability for the next 12 months, but definitely nothing more than that, or assessing the city's financial health for the next 5 years or 10 years. That would not be part of our work.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So another thing that I wanted to bring to your attention here is what we call the net cost of service to tax revenue. So the net cost of service is the cost of running city departments minus any revenues that those departments bring in on their own. So like grants or fees from service and so on. The idea is to see whether tax revenues are sufficient to cover that net cost of service. Again, that net cost of service in 2022 is definitely skewed by that pension income or negative pension expense that existed last year. But I would say that the one thing that you can see consistently is that basically tax revenues are increasing. And for this year, they were not sufficient to recover the cost of service. But again, it doesn't mean that the general fund, for example, did not bring enough revenues, but those numbers are based on full accrual basis. So they include depreciation, they include other things as well. But they are part of your financial statements on what we call the government-wide financials. If we were to look at just the general fund, so the general fund, we compare here your existing fund balance, your unrestricted portion of fund balance, and we compare that to annual expenditures. And the idea is to see if you just use your fund balance to pay your bills and your salaries, how long can you continue to do that? And probably determine that you can continue to do that for a full year. So that's obviously a very healthy fund balance. And it's been like that for a while. So definitely a strong financial position for the general fund. The next few slides are focused mostly on pension and OPEB. So this is just a summary of the contributions to the plan over the last 3 years. And again, those contributions are fairly low because of the pre-funding that the city has done before that. And then here's when we talk about those sensitivity, disclosure to the discount rate. So currently, 6.9% is the discount rate that is being used. And the current liability is about 3.1 million. So if that discount rate is decreased by 1%, that liability jumps 13 million. And then, of course, if it goes up, the plan will have no liability, it will be super funded. Similar to pension, just wanted to highlight to you the contributions.
I'm sorry, but before you go on, can you just go back to that? Can you tell me what the historical discount rate is, like an average historical discount rate?
You mean the one that CalPER's been using?
Yeah.
Or, so it's been like, I mean, I obviously don't know all the way, but at least as far as I remember, I think at some time it was 7.75, and then it went down to 7.5, and then just been going down. And the anticipation is probably gonna continue to go down at least a little bit more. But is that your question, or?
Yeah, I'm curious because you know, it just makes such a big difference. I'm curious, you know, if we're kind of at the average right now historically, or high end, low end, we should expect adjustments moving forward.
Well, I mean, obviously, those are assumptions that
Right.
CalPER's actuaries assume that this will be the discount rate, this will be the rate of return on their investments. The actual numbers are usually different. So they adjust for that when they look at the actual numbers. But I think looking at the long term, and I'm not an expert in this area, but definitely all the talks that CalPER's, at least many believe that maybe they need to de-risk a little bit, that they need to, so the expectation is that the discount rate is probably going to be lower, not higher. Like it's more likely to be decreased than increased.
Can I jump in for a second, Mr.
Yeah.
Mayor?
Of course.
A big reason that there was a push for CalPERS to lower the discount rate is because when it's higher and they don't achieve the return that the discount rate is assuming, the volatility is much greater and the swings are much more impactful to the agencies. What is happening though, when you lower the discount rate, the way they're doing it is because they're assuming a lesser return, but they know they need a certain amount of dollars in their portfolio to fund the program. They only have one other place to go for the dollars, which is the member agencies. So lowering the discount rate has this inverse effect that they have to go ask for dollars because they're now assuming they won't achieve that through their investments, which is a good assumption because they haven't been achieving that number. But that's why you sort of see the huge impact there.
Okay, thank you. If I could just ask, is there sort of a threshold, like if it were to go down to 6.5 or something, is there a threshold where that becomes an issue for us, you know, for liquidity or cash flow or anything else?
I mean, it's hard for, again, I only report on the fact and what has occurred. And I probably am responsible to look 12 months beyond our opinion date. So I would probably say that for the next 12 months, I would have no concern that the city will meet its obligations, including contributions to CalPERS. But how does it look like 5 years from now? It's very hard for me to tell. I mean, investments also, if CalPERS does not perform well, that will eventually mean more contributions. And sure, Dan would like to add.
I just want to remind the council, so, you know, the auditor's role is to look back at the past year and to give you guidance and advice that we're doing the things correctly within the past year. We retain quite often actuaries to help us look out and to see the impact of possibilities. And I think your questions would probably be more appropriate for us to work with our actuary. Sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Right. So just to wrap up this area, this is regarding OPEB, which is similar to pension. And those are the contributions that the city made over the last 3 years. Similar to pension also, it is an estimated number and the discount rate is a significant assumption. So just wanted to show you what the liability would look like if that discount rate is either increased or decreased by 1%. And in addition to that, to the discount rate, also the healthcare trends is another significant assumption. So we are required to disclose a 1% increase or decrease, also the impact of that. So other than that, the last part of my presentation is the required communication. Just to highlight to you what are our responsibilities as the audit firm versus city management. On this slide, on the left side is our responsibility as the audit firm. We are mostly responsible to provide an opinion on the city's basic financial statements. We're also responsible to evaluate the city's internal control, evaluate compliance with laws and regulations, make sure that the city's financials are clear and transparent. And then finally, we are required to communicate with the governing body. Management have a lot of responsibilities in the audit process. So management is ultimately responsible for the financial statements. Our audit does not relieve management from its responsibility for the completeness and accuracy of those financials. Management is the one responsible for establishing internal control, making financial records available to us during the audit process, establish controls that will prevent and detect fraud, inform us of any known and suspected fraud, comply with laws and regulations, and take corrective action on any audit findings. As far as independence, it is solely our responsibility to maintain our independence. We as a firm, we circulate questionnaires to all of our firm members, asking them to identify any relationships, whether directly or indirectly, with any of our clients. We also evaluate any additional services that we offer our clients, including the city of Larkspur, to make sure that they don't impair our independence. We believe that the audit was performed in the time frame communicated to the city. Every year there are some new standards or new accounting standards that needs to be implemented or at least considered. So this year there were 3 new accounting standards that the city have considered for implementation. And again, just wanted to highlight to you that some of the numbers in the financials are estimated numbers and not actual numbers. And just wanted to give you the examples. So for example, depreciation expense, the useful life of a capital asset, pension, OPEB, all of those are estimated numbers. Also, some of the important note disclosures in the financials. So note disclosures are the narrative part that provide a lot of additional information to help the reader understand the numbers. So just wanted to highlight to you some of the important ones. Cash and investment, for example, will highlight the different risks that the city's investment portfolio are exposed to, how the investments are valued, so on. The pension one will talk about the actuarial assumptions and how those numbers are derived. We're pleased to say we encountered no difficulties during our audit. There were some adjustments and management has posted all those proposed adjustments. So adjustments normally are the result of our audit. After management closed the books, if we discovered that maybe something was not accrued correctly or maybe errors in the numbers or so on, then we propose adjustments. And management has agreed to the adjustments and posted them, and none of them were material. There were no significant risk or exposure that we are aware of. We normally communicate with legal counsel and we ask them to confirm any outstanding litigations or potential contingencies. We're also pleased to say that we had no disagreement with management. There were no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal control. So that's definitely a big positive. We obtained representations from management before issuing our report. So it's a letter that management acknowledged to us that they have disclosed all known facts, that they have recorded all transactions, that they're not aware of any fraud and so on. We're not aware that management has consulted with any other accounting firm regarding audit matters. We also had no other communications with management other than our engagement letter and the representation letter. We also have not become aware of any incident of fraud or illegal acts. And I believe this is my last slide. those are just a summary of the new accounting standards that are coming the city's way. As I mentioned, that we always discuss those with management throughout the year. And then we also host a training seminar once a year where we go into in-depth discussions about those new standards and what they mean really to the city. So with that, I want to say thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Oh, well, thank you very much for the presentation. It was fantastic. Let me start with Kevin. Kevin, any questions on your end? I got no questions over there. Let me bring it back here.
I just want to
Council.
thank you for that. I mean, for the years I've been sitting here, we've had very good audit reports. And I think it speaks to how well we're fiscally managing things. So I appreciate that you are consistent and not finding any problems.
That's how good the city does. For me, I just report the facts.
Right.
And we used to have comments and observations when we worked with the city a few years back, and the city have always been responsive and coming up with corrective action plans to address those. And that's what we expected after a few years, that there are no additional comments that needs to be addressed.
Thank you.
I had a few questions, kind of going in the year to year, like looking back when you're here, January last year, January 18th. For the internal controls, one of the recommendations you made was for written policies and procedures. And I'm wondering, what progress was made on that. The second question, is our reserves. I didn't see it in the presentation. I think we had 14 months of reserves last year, and what is that standing? And lastly, on, overall monies, the Bon Air Bridge completion, and that was a major part of, what was showing up in the reporting. And now we have Measure G, and I'm really interested in tracking that and how those internal controls are going. So maybe you can comment on all three of those.
So I guess for this year, we did not identify any internal control matters. And as far as reserves, really, we just report on what the fund balance is.
What was the fund balance?
What was the fund balance for for fiscal year 23?
Yeah, no, this last report. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fiscal year 23. And I guess my slides are not.
I think it was 12 months we have now.
Yeah,
Had
about
14
12
months.
months.
Okay.
So I missed that.
But I just want to be careful about this, because that's just the entire fund balance. And sometimes the city may have already designated or established certain reserves within that amount. But the entire fund balance that is available is about 12 months.
Okay, great. And sorry, back, we did have some discussion about more written procedures. Did you see those or not see those?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the fact that we are not reporting on it, but I can't tell for sure if everything was done. But I think if the main ones for us are completed, we normally would remove the comment. So normally if, for example, if there are just no written procedures about how to do payroll, how to do accounts payable, how to do this, then we would make a comment. But if there's just a couple that are left, then we consider this to be a housekeeping item. So we'll be discussing it with management, but would not necessarily elevate to the level of the council.
Okay.
So I have to check to see like which ones exactly may not be completed yet. But obviously it wasn't significant to be elevated like it was in the past.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Dan, did you comment?
I would, Mr. Mayor. So the council was kind enough to allow the city to have a transition period with 2 administrative service directors. As you can imagine, as Ms. Gabrielle became more familiar with the systems, Ms. Orm's time freed up. So this was actually on her top 10 priority list before she retired. So it was addressed. We do have written procedures for the last year's audit. Additionally, you asked about Measure G. I want to remind the council that Measure G didn't take effect till April of the fiscal year in question, and there's a 2-month lag in sales tax revenue. So it doesn't have any meaningful reflection in this audit because it really wasn't coming into the city yet. The first meaningful audit of Measure G will be when the current fiscal year closes.
Great, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I just have a couple of quick questions. The first one is I know you mentioned there's always some corrective actions, that are done. I just want to confirm, in your opinion, they were all minor, nothing out of the ordinary. Is that correct?
You mean correcting general, like adjustments?
Yes.
Or,
Yes.
yeah, no, there were no material adjustments and management have recorded all those adjustments. So we're not aware of any unadjusted or uncorrected errors.
Okay. And my other question was, you had mentioned our investments, cash investments. Obviously, there's a balance between risk and reward, where we don't want to be too conservative and, not have enough return on our investments. We don't want to be too risky. You found it to be right in that sweet spot. Did you find us to be too, first of all, do you make a judgment?
No.
Okay, so you're not judging whether it's too risky or too
No,
safe.
I just make sure that the city is in compliance with its investment policy and with the California code. But we really don't comment. We're not investment advisors. We don't comment
Okay,
to say
fair.
well, you should invest more here or not.
Mr. City Manager, did you want to comment that?
I was simply going to let the council know that we do have an investment advisor, very familiar with the laws that govern what we can and can't do with our money. We still are conservative. I think by the standard that was set a decade ago, we've become more liberal or more risk-taking in our in portfolio. But for us, risk-taking are purchasing things like laddering CDs and doing some money market investments that we weren't doing before. I feel very confident in our practices, and Ms. Gabrielle's keeping a very sharp eye on the money. I know we were doing really well this year with our investments because the bank came back and offered us a higher interest rate to stop moving money out of the bank and into other investments. So that would be my best measure that we're managing the money well.
Perfect. Thank you. I have no other questions. At this point, I don't believe we open this up to, do we open this up to
You do
public?
offer the public a chance.
Okay. Does the public have any questions that they'd like to ask on this subject? Seeing none. At that point, I will close the public's portion of this hearing or business item. And at that point, is there anything else we need to do for this business item?
You'll need to take a vote to receive and file the audit.
Okay, can I have a motion to?
I move that we receive and file the audit that was just presented.
Second. Okay, can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Carroll,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Way,
Yes.
Mayor Kendall.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, having concluded business item 8.1, we will move to business item 8.2, which is the mid-year budget review. Can we get a staff report on that, please?
Yeah, so I want to note that Ms. Gabrielle's still here to help me if I flub any of this, but some years this is on consent, some years this takes a short amount of time. This year, we wanted to just highlight a few things in our mid-year adjustment. We're not doing anything that I would characterize as major, but we did want to make sure the council was aware that there are a few necessary adjustments that probably warrant a little more disclosure. One of the most significant that we discovered as we were reviewing the budget was that the overlap I just talked about hadn't been programmed in a way that was properly accounted for. So the overlap was to allow us to have a transition period of our retiring administrative services director with our new administrative services director. And I think that more than will have paid for itself. So that was one of the major things driving the general fund adjustments that you see in the report. The other thing that I really wanted to highlight for the community and the council, this is the first report I've given you in a few years now where I need to report out that our consultants are seeing softening in the local economy, particularly in sales tax. There's a caveat though. We have always under budgeted sales tax because we've never quite trusted that the robust numbers we were seeing were consistent with our economic base. So although I think we're going to have to lower expectations a little bit from where they've been, we've been sort of prepared for this eventuality. But we did make some adjustments here based on the latest numbers to reflect where we think sales tax is going to land. And that has some material effect on the budget for this particular year. Most of the rest of the budget are one-time purchases or slight adjustments because we've made changes to costs. I want to remind the council and the public, we practice bottom line accounting. So what that means at the end of the day is that the city manager and through the city manager, the department heads have the ability to move money around within their budget as long as the bottom line comes out correctly. So when we bring mid-year adjustments, it's because we know that that ability for us to just adjust our budgets isn't there. And we want to disclose to the council and the public that there's some items that should be adjusted officially in the budget. With that, I think the written report's quite thorough. We have a nice table in there to speak directly to the different adjustments, and Ms. Gabrielle and I are happy to answer any questions about specific adjustments that we're proposing.
Let's start with Kevin. Kevin, any questions? No questions, council. Any questions for our city manager?
Can you just remind me what PEG fee, the PEG is?
Yeah,
What does that
so
PEG stand for?
public education and government. So PEG fees are what we all pay to our entertainment provider, our cable provider, for example. It's a fee that you'll see on your statement. And so you pay that, and the purpose is so that it could be funded essentially to public access, so that those categories can be funded. So we take the PEG money and we just transfer it to the Community Media Center of Marin, who provides PEG programming to the community.
On that note, on attachment 1, the bottom section, which says special fund revenue adjustments, could you just go over those? Because I'm a little confused by, they're very big negative numbers, which I think means there's a surplus. If you
So welcome to the world of accounting, right? So negative is revenue and positive is expenditure. So Amelia, I might ask you to come up and sort of speak. I think probably the Measure B adjustment on attachment 1 is drawing some attention, and maybe you can explain what the accounting procedure is that you're capturing there.
And maybe for the benefit of the public, just a little overview of sales tax, what Measure B was and what Measure G was.
Sure. So as Amelia comes up to help me
Yeah.
marshal through, we have 2 local sales tax in Larkspur. We have a 3/4 cent sales tax that was passed on the ballot as Measure B. Measure B had a strong emphasis on infrastructure, particularly roads, but is a general tax. And it has if you go into the language of Measure B, you certainly have a fairly large number of options to choose from to fund it. You made a commitment to the voters that your strongest purpose for asking for Measure B was to rehabilitate the roads and then have the money to keep them at a quality that the community wanted. But it also talks in there about other essential services. You have issued bonds against Measure B, so there's a significant commitment in Measure B that's ongoing for several years as a result of that. In the last 18 months, well, more like 2 years, we started looking at other concerns we had in our essential service portfolio, most notably storm drains and disaster preparedness. And the council came to the conclusion that having an additional revenue stream would be helpful to the community to return the types of things that people were asking for. And so we went to the community with Measure G, which is a 1/4 cent sales tax, and it went into effect in April of 2023. And again, it's a general tax, but the council made a commitment to the public that there'd be a strong focus on disaster preparedness items and storm drain infrastructure for the time being.
Thank you.
Okay, specifically for Measure B, so originally we budgeted $3 million of Measure B revenue. And based on trend, we are anticipating that we will be receiving about $180,000 less than what we budgeted initially. So that's putting us at 2.8 million budget for Measure B for fiscal year 23-24. For Measure G, we budgeted 0 because we didn't have enough historical data when we prepared the fiscal year 23-24 budget. And now, based on actual data, actual monies that we have received for Measure Measure G, we are anticipating receiving about $857,000 for this current fiscal year.
Can I ask you a question? I'm a little confused when you say we didn't have enough data, only because if it's a sales tax and we have other sales tax measures, so for example, Measure B is a sales tax as well, are they being calculated for the sale of different products?
My understanding is we wanted to be conservative with the budget, and I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Yeah, I
to
think
further
we just
explain.
felt that we had already sensed there was going to be some softening of this revenue stream. So we felt it'd be appropriate to come with a mid-year once we had some real world data to work with, particularly because a lot of what drives our projections of how we're going to do for the year in any of our sales tax streams is December. And getting that data so we could start to see where that was going to land was really helpful. The other thing that made me feel extra conservative when we put this budget together is these two are a little different than your normal sales tax, right? So you go to purchase something down the street here in downtown, and the register's going to calculate a number of taxes to the purchase. It's going to have the base sales tax for the state, and within that base sales tax is 1% that flows to Larkspur. You might say, okay, well, that's simple enough. And then on top of that's Measure B and Measure G, and that's another cent total that's going to flow in. And you'd be correct for that purchase down the street. Where we have a layer of complexity is when we start to purchase things that are not within Larkspur. An oddity of the state law, we could spend hours. I could take you through all this history because I'm kind of geeky that way and have learned a lot about it. But to give you the very quick summary, when you pass these types of tax measures, items that are purchased outside of the jurisdiction but delivered into the jurisdiction are assessed that tax. So you buy something at Best Buy in San Rafael and you have it delivered here, it's going to have Measure B and Measure G attached to it. Now, before somebody says, I'm not going to do that because I want to save money, rest assured San Rafael has a tax up there. So if you take possession of the television while you're in San Rafael, you're going to pay the same amount. It's just going to go to San Rafael instead of back to Larkspur. The most significant delta between our normal sales tax flow and the sales tax flow you see on these extra measures is the purchase of automobiles. When you purchase an automobile, we don't have any dealerships in Larkspur, so you don't pay base sales tax to Larkspur. You pay base sales tax to where that dealership is. However, these transaction and use taxes are added to that purchase of the automobile and actually flow back to us, even though you made the purchase in another jurisdiction, because the state treats that as you taking possession of the vehicle for purposes of having it in Larkspur. So you can imagine that's a nice additional bump for us. However, what the state data is showing is people went on a car purchasing spree in our area for the last several years, and that seems to have softened. People bought their new cars and are enjoying their new cars, or they took leases out, and now we're in the cycle of 3 years while they aren't leasing cars again. So some of that initial softening is actually directly related to a good like that we know there's less purchasing occurring.
Completely random, but if somebody leases a car instead of buys it, does that still count for?
You
your
still pay
taxes?
tax on leases, and that tax would flow back to us. Yeah, it's calculated differently, and so we could spend some time on the difference between taxes on leases and purchases, but
That's kind of news to me. I always thought that the state captured the tax revenue where you register the vehicle. So if I went to Oregon when they have no sales tax, but I registered the car in Larkspur, we would get I'd have to pay.
Yes, that's how the state's tracking
Yeah,
where this money should flow. Where are you going to register the car? And so then they say, oh, you're going to register in Larkspur. Then the dealer looks up and says, oh, I need to charge you
X amount for that.
these additional
Okay.
measures. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Okay, so let's bring it back. Any more questions on this item? Councilmember Way?
Nope.
No, okay, so then I believe we need a motion on this.
Unless you want to take any public comment or question.
Okay, is there any public comment or public questions at this time on this item? Seeing none, I will then ask council to make a motion.
I'll move resolution 05/24.
I'll second that.
Can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Carroll,
Yes,
Councilmember Paulson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Way.
Yes.
Mayor Kendall.
Yes. Okay, motion passes. We now move to business item 8.3, update on the general fund reserve. Can we get a staff report on that, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor and council members. So the purpose of 8.3 is it is related to the two items behind it. And so I'm going to focus on 8.3 because that's the item in front of you. But I have a feeling as we work our way through 8.4 and 8.5, we might be coming back to 8.3 as part of that discussion. And this item is not seeking a specific action or vote, but any general direction that you want to give us. It may be appropriate as you go through items 8.4 and 8.5, you may want to return to direction that relates to item 8.3. And for everybody's going, what is he talking about? We'll make that a little more clear in a second. Tonight on the agenda is the discussion of the use of the general fund reserve potentially for a project. And before we can have that discussion, we need to update you on the status of the general fund reserve. We started as we knew that the Bon Air Bridge replacement project was coming to an end. We started to give you more regular updates on the reserve because as the council knows, and those who've watched council meetings for a while know, we've been in a very cash management focused place because the nature of the grants for the bridge were such that we often had to spend money and then wait for the state to provide the reimbursements. And so cash flow management is always our obsession because we're a property tax based town, meaning that essentially we get two big paychecks a year that are our primary sources of revenue. And we have to make sure that we can pay the bills between those two influxes of revenue. So we always hold a fair amount of cash. By policy, your policy that you've adopted, we have we hold 25% of the general fund always in reserve. And it's important to say we don't always have that in the bank because again, we're managing the cash flow. But when the year ends, your direction is we should have at least 25% of the general fund in reserve. So with that said, I'd like to talk about where the general fund reserve is positioned today, remind you about some of the policies and guidelines you've provided in the past, and then provide some recommendations and seek some guidance. And again, this will flow quite a bit into the next item. What we've provided for you in the written report is a table. The table is based on the last time you took official action with a resolution to guide the use of the general fund reserve. So we wanted to provide you with an update of where things stand. And as you can see, we've been meeting the goals that we set, with the exception of we've kind of held back on making an investment in our OPEB trust while we sort of waited to see how things would go before we actually tied that cash up into an irrevocable trust. If your auditor was still here, he'd be telling you, you need to put some money in your irrevocable trust because that's one of his responsibilities to tell you that. But fortunately, I was just telling you, we knew we were going through a period, for example, when we thought sales tax was more robust and probably is the true base for Larkspur. And because we've been careful to budget what we thought was closer to the true base, we've been enjoying some excess revenue in our sales tax streams as a result of that. Additionally, Larkspur in particular, Marin in general, went through a very healthy cycle with its property taxes. We had a lot of turnover of property, sort of one of those generational cycles where we started to see people choosing to sell their homes and new people coming into Larkspur, and that certainly results in a nice increase in property tax. The other thing is we experienced in the pandemic and then coming out of the pandemic, almost an unprecedented amount of high-end, high volume, high dollar figure reinvestment in people's homes. People remodeled, they did big remodels, they did expansions. Those also resulted in the property tax going up. And those are things we couldn't necessarily have modeled and predicted before they happened. So as a result, during the pandemic, we saw a nice increase in our property tax flow that we weren't expecting. And all of that's been just sort of parked in the general fund reserve so we could have our cash management to carry us through the bridge project. Now's the time to decide, what do we need to hold in reserve for cash management and what do we want to put to work for the community? So what we've done is go through some of the categories that we think you might want to consider as you look through what you want to do. As we note in the staff report, the balance today is $17.5 million. And of that, to meet that 25% goal, allowing some cushion because we anticipate certain expenditure categories will grow, plus we want to be prepared for inflationary factors. Staff feels that we should set the 25% and it's a dollar figure at approximately $5.5 million. And that will cover us not just now, but into another couple of fiscal years, hopefully. And that has to do with some things we know are on the horizon that'll come out more as we go through the budget process. That still leaves us with a healthy amount of money to discuss. And so one of the things that we continue to advocate, and now that we kind of are looking at this situation and what our cash is, one of the investments that we should talk seriously about is putting some of the money in a trust where it would gain interest and it would be used for OPEB liability. OPEB liability is the amount of unfunded costs that our actuary feels we've incurred by promising retiree medical to employees. A reminder to the public, we no longer do that, but so these are promises from the past that we still have money on. So we have not been making the investment that the council set as a target. The council had set as a target that we would try to do $500,000 a year, and we've been putting it in the general fund reserve rather than in the trust. $2 million is actually not the full amount. We're probably about 6 years from when you pass that policy, but given some of the other pressures and needs on the general fund reserve, I'm recommending that you put $2 million into the trust to go back and essentially make some of that payment that we hadn't done in the past. So you see, that's one of the recommendations. I skipped the second one on purpose to just get the OPEB liability out of the way.
I'm sorry, Dan, Mr. City Manager. I'm looking at the chart that you're talking about. It says a hold of capital projects and open.
I'm sorry, I was jumping down to my recommendations already. I should have said was going to incur just take that by reference, but I'm happy to take a pause and answer questions about the table.
Well, no, I was just curious about the table because on the table it has 5 million in 2022, 7 million, and then 9 million.
So those are the comment. When we took the resolution to you in 2022, we combined capital projects and OPEB liability at the direction of the council. It was one pot. I'm suggesting you break that out now. We need to be more clear of what we want to spend on capital and what we want to spend on OPEB liability. I'm trying to rewind the clock in my head. I think in particular, Councilmember Hoff felt it was too soon to bifurcate, and I think the council had agreed with him those costs. And so we had lumped them together as one category. So for the purposes of making sure my staff report tied correctly to the old resolution, I didn't break them out for the update to you. So I lumped them together in the table as well. And that is your direction on record right now. So, but I would suggest that one direction you may want to give me is it's time to address them separately and assign them their own dollar values. Any other questions on the table? So what I'll do is I'll take you really quickly through the balance of what I'm thinking we should, how we should assign these different amounts in the general fund reserve. And I think we should have our discussion and certainly take public comment. So my final recommendation is on page 4, and it's a table or balance sheet on page 4.
And Dan, I'm sorry, just so I understand, and I read 5 different reports, so they're kind of jumbling in my mind.
Fair enough.
But there was one report that talked about taking money from either the general fund or from Measure B or Measure G. There's all these different pots. What we're talking about now is just the general fund. Is that right?
That's right. And
Okay.
I'll put a big underline on how it relates to what you just referred to, which is 8.5.
Okay, and
Yeah.
also, just so I understand, while you're saying this is the general fund, those are general taxes, but they're not part of the general fund, even though they could be used for other purposes. Is that
Any
accurate?
dollars that are in the general fund reserve are set there by policy of the council. They came in as discretionary monies. They're unrestricted. You've restricted some of them by policy, and some of them, the city manager and the administrative services director in her role as city treasurer have assigned to the general fund reserve until policy direction from the council instructs us to do otherwise. Your longstanding mixture of policy and practice can be summarized this way. Make sure we have 25% of the general fund in reserve, and generally assign everything else as capital unless we tell you otherwise. That's kind of, if you take all your policies together, that's the simplified statement of the guidance that you've given us. When you adopted the resolution in 2022, one of the purposes was to say, for this era, for this particular window, when we've accumulated a large amount of cash, we probably need a little bit more direction than that sort of basic policy line that we use as our guidance.
Thank you.
Sure. I allude to in the report, you got into the discussion with the auditor. PERS has been lowering the discount rate, and that's having a material effect on the city, because even though we use bonds to pay our debt to PERS, our unfunded balance, and move it into bonds and away from PERS's volatility, essentially setting that number at 0, we always knew we'd be subject to future fluctuations for CalPERS on a year-by-year basis. Based on the information at the time, our hope and belief was that those fluctuations could be manageable in any given budget year. Well, 2 bad things happened at the same time. At the same time that PERS was lowering the discount rate, which has that immediate effect that they got to go find some cash somewhere. Well, sorry, I'm going to be editorialized. While the rest of us were all kind of doing okay or even pretty well in the market, somehow CalPERS did not do very well in the market. So as a result, they've essentially told all member agencies that we are issuing a new amortization schedule for some amount of unfunded debt. And we've been given a preliminary one that we're picking through to present to you. But I can see already we're going to have pension cost volatility for at least a few years as we build this new cost into the budget. I don't think we want to be that volatility to affect this delivery of service to the community. We don't want volatility from CalPERS to have an immediate effect where our citizens don't enjoy the quality of life that we're delivering to them. So I think we need to take some of this money that we have in reserve and particularly park it to say, for the next few years, if we need to, we've got some money set aside to deal with this volatility until we can properly program it into our budget. And that's what $2 million is what I've labeled as set aside for volatility and pension costs. It's important to remember that the reverse can happen. The pension portfolio might suddenly do well. And as a result, what they demand of their member agencies can change again. I don't know that it's going to ever look rosy, but I can hold out hope that better investors will figure something out for them. In fairness to them, their confidence level is very high to achieve. And for those who understand investment, they're trying to make sure they have so much cash on hand to pay off their debts. In a dream world, and pension should have 100% confidence. They should have as much money on hand as they want to pay out. Hers is now having to adjust for a 70% confidence level, which is kind of a hold your breath number for those of us who've been told that's our retirement. So anyway, that's a different conversation for a different day, and I'll probably vent a lot about CalPERS when we have that conversation. So here's the big ticket number that's in the reserve, because most of the remaining things are small commitments you asked us to already set aside. The big ticket is how much do we set aside for capital? I would suggest, following your guidance in the past, that the balance should be made available to capital projects. I mean, one of the goals of the city is to improve the quality of life of our community. And one of the major ways we do that is to invest in our infrastructure and our capital projects. And so right now, today, we feel comfortable suggesting that you set 7.1 million aside for capital projects. In this report, I just wanted to show you have that much money to set aside if you so choose, because it's relevant and urgent to think about that for the next two items, because I wanted you to see that decisions you may want to make tonight about the project in question, the library project, you can guarantee. As we get into those items, you'll see one of the questions is the city going to guarantee the project? And you have the money in the reserves to be able to do that. You have 7.1 million that I'm suggesting you can invest in capital projects, and it can give you some comfort to have the discussion that you need to have tonight on the other items, that you're talking about real money. This is money that, other than the fact that we sometimes are moving money around to pay the bills, this is money that at the end of the fiscal year is there. So you can consider it and feel comfortable that you can make other decisions tonight, knowing the general fund's capable of absorbing that cost. So I'm seeking direction this evening on this material in the report and the parameters that I've suggested, so that we can draft a new resolution that we would then come and say, let's rescind the 2022 resolution and replace it with new direction from the council. So this is meant to be a general discussion, and from that guidance, we'll come back for a firmer decision.
Okay, so let me ask a question. The next three items are very interrelated. I would like to, I mean, the question is, we have a certain amount of money we could spend. We have a certain amount of capital improvement projects that need to be funded, and we have to make choices how to allocate that money. Would it make sense to, instead of having discussion about this item alone right now, to introduce either one or both of the next items and then have a discussion about all three of them together?
It's entirely doable if that's comfortable to the mayor and the council.
All right, let me put it to council and get council's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I had similar thoughts, especially the library. So I don't see any drawbacks. I'd like to do that.
So my only suggestion would be 8.4 has definitive action that's required. So it may be appropriate to do 8.5's presentation now, and then have Mr. Skinner do the more thorough presentation of the decisions being asked of you tonight in 8.4.
Well, all right. So before we do that, could you just go over those commitments of 8.4 that we are punting to the end
Whether or not to actually start the project and pay for it.
for the
or-
library?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, that would be the last piece of the puzzle. So I agree. So
I did them in this order because in my mind, issue one, do you actually have money to guarantee the project? You do. Issue two, do you want to do the project? Issue three, do you want to give us direction to go scrape potential other sources of money so the general fund is not the guarantor of all of the money that we're talking about?
yeah, so if it's okay with council, I would suggest that we then go to 8.5, talk about all of our sources of money, all of our capital improvement projects that we're trying to make sure get funded, and then come back to, where money is going to come from for the library. Is that appropriate for everybody? Kevin, does that work for you? Okay. Okay, so can we get a staff report on 8.5, please?
I can do this one fairly quickly, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor, so we can move on to the substance at hand. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So as the project has evolved for the Commons project, which is the umbrella term for everything that's occurring at the Commons, the property that's at Doherty Drive and Rose Lane. One of the things that's going to be before you in item 8.4 tonight is the consideration of adding a considerable amount of community room space. And in particular, whether or not you want to invest in having that space be done to a standard that would qualify it as a location for disaster recovery and response. Those are significant distinctions because as you make those decisions, they may or may not qualify the project for monies that are not as obvious otherwise to be that the project might qualify for. Some of these are policy decisions of the council and some of these are legal questions that your staff is researching. So your staff wanted to identify for you what these potential pots are should you decide that you want to build the community rooms to the standard where they could serve these multiple purposes. So in the staff report attached for item 8.5, we are providing you with our general thoughts and research to date about the different pots that may or may not be available. We're still trying to refine so we can come back to you with potential dollar amounts from these different pots. The first one is the American Rescue Plan Act money that the city received during the pandemic. At the time, it was very unclear from the federal government exactly what you could and couldn't spend money, ARPA money on. But there were some categories that were very clear. They were priorities of the Biden administration. One of the ones that was on the list was storm drains. And so we did a handful of actions and spent about 1/6 of our money, which was almost $3 million, to deal with a handful of very pandemic related issues. And then the council assigned the balance of the money to go towards storm drains. What we're finding is that as we continue to build up monies to address our storm drain master plan, they're just it's not like the roads where one, there's a lot of contractors that are happy and ready to bid on roads and they understand roads. Storm drains are a little more complicated. And you can't just simply say, we're going to do this area of town all at once for storm drains. They have to be a little more thought out and the timing is different. So your public works directors here can speak to this if you want, which is that he's working diligently to put as much of this together and get as much of it contracted and bid and contracted as possible. But due to the lag in how long it's taken us to get some of the ARPA money out there and working, the federal government keeps refining these guidelines and adding things to them. Frankly, I think there's a lot of communities that just keep lobbying them to add stuff. And we do think that some element of the projects probably now qualify for ARPA money, particularly as it relates to disaster response.
When you see the project, you're talking about the library?
Library project.
Okay.
If I say the project during this talk, it'll be
Okay.
the Commons project.
Thank you.
The property. So Ms. Gabrielle and myself are digging through the latest guidelines, which are pretty much fresh off the press, to see exactly what they've now said is possible with the money so that we can come to you with a clear and defensible argument if we're going to move any of this money from its current designation of storm drains into the project.
Which is 2.3 million.
That's what's still out to be potentially designated. I don't think you probably are going to be able to qualify that entire amount, but I think we might be able to do some of it. So we really want to come back once we've been able to figure that part of it out.
So let me ask a question. Hypothetically, we say, you know what, this money's got to be designated by the end of 2024. We don't want to lose it. We want to designate it for the library with the project. It sounds like we can't actually do that tonight because we don't know how much of that we could use for the project. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Unfortunately, because the guidelines around ARPA have been so fluid, we aren't comfortable making a definitive recommendation about the ARPA money this evening.
Okay. And I'm sorry, follow up on that is, let's say we hypothetically decide to use general funds for the project. 2 months later, we find out, oh, we could use the ARPA money for the project. Could we switch it at that point?
If you decide tonight to award the project and the additional costs, and then we come to you in 2 months' time and say, we've figured it out, here's how much ARPA money can be moved in the project, you can do that.
Got it. So tonight, when we decide whether or not to approve the increased cost of the project, we don't need to decide where that money is coming from. We just have to feel comfortable the money is somewhere.
Again, the reason for the sequence of the staff reports is tonight we're telling you, you need to be comfortable saying, if none of these other pots of money materialize, we know we have it in the general fund reserve.
Okay, thank you.
The next 3 pots of money are our 3 local sales tax streams. By policy of the council, to make sure we maximize the transparency of the use of our local sales taxes, the council instructed us to retain all revenue related to those local sales taxes in separate funds. Makes it really easy for a member of the public to track the auditing of the different sales tax streams. You're probably going, wait, there's 3, we were only talking about 2 in the last item. That's because the very first sales tax we did in my time here was Measure C. And we refer to these by the measure letter, that designation that was on the ballot. And Measure C was a limited time half-cent sales tax that the state that we had put on the ballot. And there's an oddity to the way sales tax is collected by the state, where it continues to trail and come in even after a sales tax ends. And so in addition to the fact that we weren't able to spend all the Measure C money before Measure B passed, for a variety of reasons that could take an hour or so to explain, we kept seeing healthy revenues under Measure C for several years after the measure had stopped. And it has a lot to do, in short, with the way auditing occurs at the state level for businesses and the way businesses are required to track and report and flow sales tax up to the state. So combination of factors means that there's still $842,000 sitting in the Measure C fund. It's pretty much all parked there with a label that says potentially to be used for fire station improvements. A lot of those decisions were made while we were in the process of considering what became the merger that is Central Marin Fire. And we haven't used that money in part because the need wasn't prevalent at the time, and in part because the creation of Central Marin Fires changed the conversation to, well, now we have an entity with 4 stations. Where are these 4 stations all ideal? Do we need to invest in all of them? How much do we need to invest? And you've heard presentations, and the members of the Fire Council have heard presentations about those questions. The council may want to think about whether to free up this $842,000. Measure C clearly had a disaster preparedness component to the many promises made to the voters. So it might very well be a balance you feel comfortable reassigning to this project if you make that designation this evening. One reason I have a caveat and didn't bring you that sort of recommendation this evening is you made a commitment in the ordinance that you would seek a recommendation from your oversight committee before you make expenditures out of these 3 funds. So timing wise, I couldn't convene that body with our set of recommendations before this meeting was going to take place. So I still need to have an opportunity to go to the oversight committee and then come back so that you have their feedback and recommendation as part of your consideration. But I wanted you to be aware that that pot of money exists. The next one is the Measure B fund. Those who've followed us in the past about this will recall when we set up Measure B, we thought we'd see 1.8 million a year. And we bonded at 1.6 million a year, thinking, well, that's fantastic. We have a nice little cushion. 3 things happened simultaneously. One is the revenues of our 2 shopping centers, 2 main shopping centers, grew quite a bit. They both have matured into the new economy and are both doing quite well. And they're generating much more sales tax than any projection for Measure B ever contemplated. We think that's probably about right, that we've softened our expectations a little bit for those shopping centers, but our tracking is probably correct for what they're doing for the foreseeable future. The other thing is a decision called the Wayfair decision about how internet tax flows. And as a result of that decision, monies that were not flowing to local jurisdictions started to flow to us. It's done through the county by a complicated formula, but it's predictable and manageable, and we've started to incorporate it into how we project sales tax. Why am I telling you all of this? We were only budgeting that we thought 1.8 million was going to come into this fund. We started seeing 2.4 million, 2.7 million, 2.8 million. So we're doing far better than we had ever anticipated. And as a result, the fund built up an unanticipated reserve because of the excess revenue above what we were projecting. Again, while we've done some preliminary assignments of this money consistent with the tax measure and the what was said to the voters, it's some of the uses contemplated in the staff report on their 8.4 are consistent with the themes of Measure B, and it may be appropriate to dedicate some of this money if you feel it's appropriate to the project. This, again, should go to the Citizens Oversight Committee for their feedback and opinion before you make that decision.
Can you remind me if the Citizens Oversight Committee for C, B, and G are the same group of people? Or
You
are they
you
separate?
chose to merge them into one.
Okay,
group.
so it's one group.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep. So, which has actually been really helpful because we have new members and we have folks who've been with us since Measure C and have that historical perspective on it. And then the next pot of money is the Measure G fund, which we just gave you our projection of what we think will be in that fund. That's the fund of the three that's most explicitly talking about disaster preparedness as one of its primary goals. And so again, if we're going to have a disaster response center at the Commons as part of our contemplation for the project, then it certainly seems like a discussion we might want to have about dedicating money there. One possibility that we can talk about now, we can talk about in coming meetings as we continue to work our way through the use of the general fund, is the general fund reserve could essentially front a cost while Measure G builds up. And then Measure G could slowly pay back the general fund reserve for that quote unquote loan. I'm saying quote unquote loan because they're all policy decisions. I mean, they're all monies that are flowing into the city that you've said by policy should go in these different pots. And so you should by policy decide if one pot might front a cost for another pot and then get paid back. I only suggest that because let's suppose you decide that it'd be appropriate for Measure G to contribute hypothetically $1 million to the project. It's gonna be a while before we all feel comfortable that Measure G is bringing in that kind of revenue. And there are other pressures on Measure G. So maybe you decide the general fund reserve spends $1 million, but over the next 10 years, $100,000 a year flows out of Measure G back into the general fund. All something you could contemplate.
And I'm sorry, just for, again, my understanding, what we are doing tonight for 8.4, we are going to either pass or not pass the resolution saying that we are going to take on the responsibility of funding whatever levels we feel are appropriate for the project.
Okay.
8.5, we are not deciding tonight who is going to guarantee that money, which pot that's going to come from or anything like that. Is that correct?
8.4 is going to ask you to guarantee the project with the general fund reserve. 8.5 is telling you we think we can return within the next few months with a plan to alleviate some of that guarantee from the general fund reserve.
Right. So we don't have any specific action for 8.5. It's more informational.
Unless you want to give me feedback.
Okay.
But to that point, though, it would allow then to move forward with the contract, knowing that we have we've allocated this additional money
we felt it was appropriate
Right.
to not only tell you you can guarantee it with the pot of money you have cash in hand, but that there may be other pots of money that you feel comfortable
Mhm.
drawing from.
Which specifically are the measure B, C, and G.
And then the
pots.
ARPA money. And
And
then,
the
the-
ARPA
and then the last one is, as the council knows, and those who followed the project for a while, there is road work and other path of travel work related to the project. And so we do have accounts that serve that purpose in the general fund for road maintenance and improvements for access. And some of those accounts are holding money because frankly, when you build a new road, you don't immediately start spending these restricted dollars on it. So as part of our recommendation, we'd probably come back as we come up with a final number for what our enhancements to Rose Lane as a street, for example, are. Some or all of that cost, it may be appropriate to talk about coming out of restricted monies. And in particular, I'm talking about gas tax money from the state and impact fee money that the city's collected. Those are common pots that we use for roads all over the city. And there's a policy argument to be made that they could at least defray that particular cost.
Okay, I have a question either for our city manager or for our city attorney, which is there clearly is a benefit of using specified money and saving general reserve money because the general reserve could always be used for this specific money or for anything else, whatever we need it for. Is there a benefit to using the general fund? You know, is if we have measure B money or G money and we have some type of liability, is that protected from liability because it's only allowed to be used for certain purposes? Or is there any other reason why we might want to use general funds as opposed to specific funds?
Only to the extent that Measure B has a liability, which is the bond payment. So as long as we come to you with a spending plan that presents no jeopardy to that. Additionally, I would argue as the primary fiscal agent for you, I think you have an obligation to continue to make sure Measure B can guarantee the maintenance of the roads now that we've invested so much money in them. I think as long as I can confidently make both of those statements to you, then the other money should be discussed. It would be appropriate.
So what I'm hearing is there is really no, so let's say all those things you just said are true, and we have enough money in Measure B for everything that's supposed to happen. We have extra money left over. There's no benefit to using general funds as opposed to specific funds.
A general rule of thumb for a city manager is to always try to spend restricted dollars first.
Okay. And city attorney, no legal reason why we would want to spend general funds instead of restricted funds, right?
The only thing that I can think of is that it reduces risk of a claim that you've improperly spent restricted funds for an improper purpose.
Okay.
But it's also the case that if we received an allegation like that, the funds could be returned and replaced with general fund dollars. But
Right.
If you're just asking for me to conceptualize possibilities, that would be a risk reduction.
Okay. All right. So let me ask council at this point. I would love to hear public input before we really have a discussion. But if we have specific questions we want to ask staff, maybe that should go first. So let me ask if anyone in the council has questions they'd like to ask staff.
I don't have questions, but I think it's important that we better communicate what we mean by a disaster response sort of center, that we're imagining the opportunity to build. And I, as somebody who's worked in this space now for a long time, I think it's important that people realize that the opportunity within a new structure that is a civic structure like this can be designed in for, let's take for many examples. One would be can I explain these things?
Oh, yeah.
One would be a cooling center. So when it gets to be 110 degrees and nobody has air conditioning, they can come down to a community room and have an air conditioned cool area for their temperature. it can be designed as clean air centers so that when we have wildfire smoke that completely absorbs the community into red skies, these community rooms that are designed now with good HVAC systems can actually be places of safety for the community. They're generally designed now for PSPS, public safety power shutdowns, so that they may have an alternative energy source to them, so that community members can come down and charge a phone, use a laptop, use a power source that they may not have in their own home. I've seen them used, like, for instance, when there were the big wildfires in Napa a few years ago, the San Geronimo Community Center in Woodacre became a location site for opportunities to create mass feeding opportunities so that community members could come to a community space in a safe location and get meals prepared for them or meals served to them. There's enormous amounts of opportunity for even setting up locations for immunization should there be a need with our community. So when we're talking about a disaster preparedness place, it is a whole spectrum of ways in which we can design a community space that can serve multiple needs that the community has for even mild environmental catastrophes and smoky days, not just major earthquakes and other things like that. So, I mean, I could elaborate even further what these centers can do, but it's a dramatic opportunity for us to create safe space for not only our seniors who live in our community, but the school kids who live who are across the street, to have a building that's new and has all of the amenities that provide safety and security for them. So just wanted to get that out there because I'm hearing things from some community members that, what do we need a building like that for? What is a disaster prepared building? They are more than what we imagine them to be for opportunities for a safe place for people to get air conditioning and clean air and other resources.
Yeah, that's an excellent explanation. Wanted to add one comment on the nuance of disaster prepared location. As best as I know, the only public building that's actually in the city of Larkspur's city limits that meets this description is the Central Marin Police Authority building. The description, for the purposes of what we're talking about, includes the ability to survive an earthquake. And it gets designed and built to a heightened standard for that particular purpose, so that if that particular disaster occurs, it should still be there to serve its purpose. So that's one of the big distinctions. A lot of folks who've talked to me about this, they heard the term resiliency center, which is a popular term that PG&E likes to use. Very important role. A lot of Councilmember Vice Mayor Way's descriptions would be in a resiliency center too, but a resiliency center is not necessarily a building that's been designed to the standard that it should be able to survive the natural disaster itself. I also want folks to appreciate, we know these are not rooms big enough to house half the community. So our long-term disaster preparedness and response plan is to do a campus approach where we need to identify a variety of facilities in our jurisdiction that can all serve a role when this occurs. But for that to work, we need to know that these facilities are going to be there when we need them to be. And being able to build one from scratch and have it also serve the dual purpose of being community rooms is a real opportunity. So that's why it's proposed that way.
Let me take a second to thank Vice Mayor Way. That was a phenomenal explanation. Related, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you finish.
Related, you alluded to the fact that there may be some funding that would be available if this did qualify as a disaster, I think it's recovery center. Could you elaborate on that?
So if the council makes this determination, then one of the things we'll do is we'll have our team that looks for grants go out and start to look to see if there are any grant opportunities. We don't want to budget for those because, one, we have to find them and be certain we qualify for them. And then secondly, we have to determine that that's a good investment to actually go pursue a grant. And people are probably going, what do you mean? Grants are great. They're free money. Grants are not always free. Sometimes the criteria to actually take that grant means you're spending more money than you're getting. And so we wanted to point out that we think that's going to open up doors to us, but we have to go study those opportunities once you make the decision that we're going down that path.
Okay, I think Councilmember Paulson.
Yeah, thank you. So, I wanted to kind of continue on where Vice Mayor Way was going. I think the question is who could give us a really good and maybe more quantitative description of the benefits of a resilience center, disaster center. So, I'm just going to make a few comments which are in the spirit of questions and what would help me make a more informed decision. So I think all those things are valuable. I also have been watching the Central Marin Police Station, and I know that it's really in the last 4 years only been used a couple times, like the PSPS events, and I think there were a couple cooling center and times. So I just
used by the community.
Used by the community. Yeah.
It has served the disaster response purposes needed for public safety to operate during the disaster.
Okay, so seeing that would be very helpful. So that's something that I don't know. And if there's data from Central Marin and maybe projections of how it'd be used here, that would be really helpful. The other is the whole trade-off element. So maybe, our public works director could speak on this, but the master storm drain plan that I remember was from 2019 or earlier. And there was still a lot of unknowns when we were looking at Measure G last year. So we couldn't video scope things because of the drought and, the need for water to do erosion. I'm wondering if we have a clear sense of where the priorities are for just storm drains.
Yeah, so this is the challenge with taking this item before 8.4. That discussion is appropriate for when we come back, where you say, do I want to actually pull money out of this particular pot? You still got to make a fundamental decision tonight, which is, are you going to approve this project knowing you might have to cover all additional costs with the general fund?
Mhm.
That's your question tonight. Whether or not you're going to move this other money around is not actually the question tonight. That's why, at some point we should probably do 8.4 because then you get the full presentation about the project.
Okay.
So,
Okay, that's fair, but I think there's it can be separated. So let's just say that I did decide to do 8.4, I would still be asking these questions. And that's where I'm at. I'm wondering what this would do, what the priorities and the needs of the storm drain master plan is. And the last piece is, is when we can get the COCs to weigh in for B, C, and G, for, the COC that looks over those two measures.
okay, so I guess that opportunity cost question that you're trying to raise means that we need to bring you the entire unfunded project list, because you're essentially want to open that back up and ask the question of whether these dollars should flow here versus any unfunded project. Your priority might be the storm drains, but Mayor Kendall's project on the unfunded list might be something else. So we can do that. I don't know how much time we can do that without starting to jeopardize our grant money. I mean, one option you have tonight is to say, I'm not comfortable guaranteeing this additional cost, so just build the smaller building. And we need to get to that question probably at some point this evening. So that's one thing that we could do. We'd have to schedule a meeting to have that conversation, but I don't know, Julian, what's the ballpark on the unfunded project list cost? 100 million? Okay, yeah. So, that's constantly your decision. That's your decision with all the
Right.
general fund dollars.
But I think my question's narrow. I'm not asking about the fire stations. I'm asking specifically about Measure G and the storm drains. So that was designated largely for, things like sinkholes and problems that we saw
Well, I
at
think
600,000 a year.
we need to have that as a different conversation because I'm not sure that's true. What I think happened with Measure G is you said a priority for spending Measure G money is to invest in our storm drains and our storm drain master plan. Another priority for Measure G is to invest in disaster preparedness and recovery efforts. You didn't say which one is more important than the other one.
Okay, and so and I'm also not trying to say I have a preference. I'm trying to say that I'm looking for guidance. First and foremost, I understand there's a decision tonight and, the mayor's, thinking of a more holistic 360 to go 8.5 is fine. I'm not, trying to, it's really about the odds right now. So as I understand it, we have the general fund money if we decide to do 8.4, so we don't even need to look at these other sources. This is just our backup. I mean, that's a true statement, right?
Correct.
Okay, so with that spirit, I think I have some sense, but for the backup, I'm trying to just do some tea leaf reading. And to me, part of that is how far are we, not just on the whole capital improvements plan, which would be, too much to consider, but on this the storm master plan,
Oh, I
have we
understand.
gotten more
I
information?
apologize, Councilmember Felsen. I understood what you're asking, but
Mhm.
my point that I want you to think about is we should have that same discussion about the general fund reserve then and the 100 million in unfunded projects, because your priorities of those projects might not be the same as Vice Mayor Ways, and they may not be the same as Mayor Candel's. Your staff's been working under the belief that getting the project that's discussed in item 8.4 built is the city's top priority currently under the combination of the 2050 plan and the grant opportunities that are before us. Additionally, what you'll see when we do that presentation is you have an opportunity to do more that you won't have at that cost in the future. But I think to take one of the measures, measure G, or to take one of the costs, the storm drains, is to not be fair to the entire portfolio of your responsibilities, because you have a lot of unfunded issues around the city. So it's just, I'm asking you to recognize all these pots of money have programming assigned to them and choices to be made. And I wouldn't necessarily elevate one pot of money and one need without at least recognizing the other.
Right.
ones as well.
Okay, and I don't want to need any more time, but it wasn't so much elevation as just focusing on that because we just passed it and I was sensitive to, how we were spending that money. But one factor that was in the staff report is that we can't even spend the money now because of the logistics of the materials and that. So that's one reason to go to the plan of using it for something else. And then maybe the possibility of addressing the drains directly later will come later. I mean, I'm not saying this is the most important issue, but it's the one that I've wanted the most clarity on.
Fair enough. And I think when we come back, you can have that discussion. I just feel compelled to point out that your staff's working with a whole body of needs and a whole body of direction over several years. And the recommendations contained in 8.4 reflect our understanding of the totality of the instruction and direction of the council over multiple meetings over multiple years.
Okay, thanks.
Let me take a second and ask Councilmember Carroll, checking in with you. Do you have any questions for staff before we open it up to the public?
No, just can't wait till we get to 8.4.
All right, so anything with council before I open it up to the public?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, I will now open up to the public for comment on this item. If anyone would like to address the council, come on forward, of course.
Council members. Ann Morrison, President of the Common Foundation. Gabe, talking about storm drains. Julian, great job on Hillview. All of our streets in the little area of Hillview would be flooded with the storm that we just had, and no floods whatsoever. So we're very pleased with the what happened to our neighborhood. So thank you for that, Julian, and City of Larkspur. I just want to say, I am so excited to have this discussion about having a disaster area. What just happened recently in our short little storm, to see the people at the Bay Club that were being escorted out because they weren't members, but they needed power, to see people even at Pete's Coffee that were standing room only. We need a disaster area. So this community, when it came up to having this community rooms, I was so excited. So I think it's something that needs to be discussed and that we need to have, especially just being in Lahaina, to see those poor people living in hotels and really nowhere to go as a community. That's the reason it's called the Commons Foundation. It's a common area for our communities to go to. So I just want to just say, I hope you all approve what's being discussed. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the public? Okay, seeing none, let's bring it back to council. Would someone like to start this conversation? Yes, we're now, we'll combine them all right now. And does 8.4 need a staff report?
8.4 has a PowerPoint presentation and a
Okay.
lot of information.
Okay.
And as he comes up here, I want you to know that Mr. Skinner's here. I'm going to embarrass him, even though he has a newborn in his house. So
Oh, boy.
I told him he could do this by Zoom, but he really wanted to present it to you in person. So
He just wanted to get out of the house.
Good evening, Mayor Candidate, members of council, members of the public. My name is Julian Skinner. I'm the Public Works Director for the city of Larkspur. And so tonight's item 8.4 has two requested actions for you. They are related. One is, as we brought you back in December, the results of our RFP for the new library and community space. We are now asking for you to authorize the city manager to award that contract to Alton. And then in concert with that, we're asking you to make the budget amendments that would be necessary to award that project. Whoops. This is just a little history of before. Tonight, as we've mentioned before, the Commons Foundation raised over $5 million towards a new library. The city received two grants, just over $6 million for the library. We went through the RFP process, and in December, we did come to you and say that we had selected Alton that we wanted to move forward with a design build contract for the new library and community space. This is the Alton, and Nolan Tam was our architect. This is their proposal. So this is somewhat what we'll end up with. These things always change from what they first submit to when we go through and work with the architects and the contractors and evolve what the final project will be. But essentially it's a building at the north end of the site that would house both the library and the community space, a parking lot and some degree of landscaping. And then at the left is Rose Lane that comes off of Doherty that I'll be subject to one of the projects that we'll discuss. So this was Alton's bid that we shared with you back in December. As you'll recall, while we're calling this the Commons project, we do have it split into a number of distinct projects in our capital improvement program, and that's based on the funding sources. The grants, for example, are restricted for certain components of this project, mainly the library structure, and then the $1 million grant is for site work only. And then we've split up the community space and the library components of the project into separate projects too, just for an accounting purpose, essentially. But it would be one contract that we would be signing with Alton to do all of these, and then behind the scenes, all the accounting would funnel through these projects. So their total bid was 13.152 million. That does include an alternate item that we had in there to make the community space a little bit bigger than what we had programmed. And so our recommended bid award does include that. That bumps the community space from 1,600 square feet to close to 2,000 square feet. And then this is just kind of, again, graphically just showing the different projects that we have. Obviously the library in red here, and then next to it would be the community space. And then going down, we have access site. This is the kind of the blue areas here. So this is a different pot of money than what would be spent in the building. And then the general site, the green area is the landscaping component of the project. And then the little purple area inside the red is we're also proposing to fund the furniture, the fixtures, and the equipment within the library through a CIP project. So that's also included in the budget amendment request. This table here kind of summarizes all of the funds that we're talking about. These are the 6 projects here. So this budget amendment that we're asking you to do tonight, it would add the 6th project, that furniture and fixtures and equipment. The other 5 projects are already in the CIP. They're just not fully funded. We put some seed funding in them previously, partly to get through the RFP and the RFQ to see what the cost would be for the community space. And so looking at these numbers, the first column that has dollar figures in it, that's how much is in your budget today. That's in your adopted budget. And then the next column that's highlighted in yellow, that is the request tonight. We're asking for those funds to be amended into the capital improvement program. And those funds, if you add them to the existing funding, the last column is your total funding. You'll notice here that this total funding for all of these projects is 16 million, whereas the slide before that I showed you for the Alton contract we're asking you to award is 13 million. So the difference there is this is the overall project budget. So this includes all the staff time, it includes the consultants, all the soft costs that are required to complete this project, not just the Alton bid. And so all of these proposed amendment dollar figures that you see here, with the exception of the new library, that 232,582, that's from the Commons Foundation. The rest of all of those numbers there are all proposed as general fund reserve, as we'll talk about a little bit later. And the reason there's an additional Commons Foundation number in here is when we first set this project up, we just put a placeholder of 5 million in there for the Commons Foundation donations. Whereas we actually need the match for the grant of 5.2 million. And so the Commons Foundation had 5.3 at the last time I checked. I'm sure it's more than that now. But so this is just putting that 232,000 into the project on paper. We've got to have in the budget enough to award the contract. So that finishes that piece of accounting. The rest of these numbers are all projected as general fund for now. And then again, there's a conversation about some other funds that could replace those down the road. The other thing that's a little different from these numbers versus, again, these are budget numbers that I'm showing here. The other set of numbers I showed you was Alton's bid numbers. The other difference, other than the soft costs I talked about, was for the budget amendment, we're only proposing doing a minimal amount of site landscaping. As we look at how the bid came in and we look at our funds, we feel it's important to keep a contingency allowance in case we have any additional expenses in the building structure and the things that actually need to get completed in order to open the library and the community space. So what we're doing is we're reducing the amount of landscaping from the Alton bid down to a bare minimum. So that basically means we've committed to do some screening to the subdivision. And we also need to do some amount of landscaping for erosion. We don't just, the site won't just be mud when we're finished. There's some things we have to do for erosion. So in the budget, what we're proposing is a minimal amount of landscaping. And I'll talk a little bit later about some of the other costs that we could run into in this project and kind of a hierarchy of how we may address some of those as they come up. So if you add all these numbers there, the bottom line is a $4.66 million budget amendment that we're asking for you tonight. And again, we're proposing general fund for all but the 232,000 of that. And that's required to fully fund the project so that you can do the other part of the request tonight, and that's award the contract to Alton. So let's see, the first is kind of just a summary of what I presented on the last slide. The reason for the budget amendment is so we can award the contract. We don't award contracts if we don't have the budget for it. And then we've already talked a little bit in some of the other items that you saw tonight about options for funds other than the general fund. As well as the city manager gave an update on the health of the general fund reserve and how much money is there, and the council's previous policy of spending general reserve funds on capital projects. And then another important thing to consider in looking at this expenditure now is this is the most economical time to do these additional improvements that we're requesting the funds for. The grant and the Commons Foundation funds are paying for the library building itself. So we will have a contractor on board. We'll be doing construction at the site. It's the most economical time to add the community space to the site. It also would be best for the neighbors to have all the construction happen at once rather than it be phased now, build the library now, find funding later for a community space and have another construction project years down the road on the same site. And then this slide is just talking about the alternate funding that the city manager discussed previously. So again, we're not at the point where we can recommend any of those other funds for this need tonight. So that's why we're recommending general fund reserve at this time, acknowledging that we will come back after we've looked further into some of those alternate fund sources. And again, do another budget amendment at that time to swap out any other funds that are identified for the general fund reserve. Some of the contingencies and enhancements. So the budget amendment that we're asking you for tonight would fully fund the Alton proposal with a contingency allowance. There are some other enhancements that Alton and Nolan Tam putting their proposal together said, I wish if you had a little bit more money, we think these would be a good addition for your project. But with the funds that we had at the time of the RFP, they didn't fit the program. So they provided us with these items, enhancements that they think would work well with the project and with some rough dollar figures for us to consider. And so we've looked through these and kind of put them in what we think is a high priority. So these are things that resonate with what the project desire was, the need and purpose, and then some medium and then some lower priority items. And so our path forward with these items is, as we have contingency funds in the project, as to the extent the project's moving forward and we don't have any unforeseen conditions and we have contingency funds available, we would like to start picking off some of these enhancements and getting them incorporated into the project. Things such as a sliding door for flexibility that allows us to enlarge the children's play area, some outdoor space that's immediately next to the building so that we can have some flow from indoor to outdoor, we think are important adds. Those are on the higher end. The medium priority would be that landscaping that I said we removed from Alton's approval. So there's a lot of trees, a lot of drought tolerant planting, habitat garden, things that we would like to work in. But we need to make sure that we have funds available and not needed to complete the vertical structure of the library first before we would entertain those. And then there's a list of others that are kind of more nice to haves than things that we really want to get in the project. So they're in the lower priority. And then, so as I mentioned, what we plan to do is track our costs as we're going through. We have a contingency allowance. We'd like to get those high priority items into the project. And so we will come back to you if we look like there's still things we want to work in, but we've had to spend some of the contingency allowance. And we feel there's more funding that needs to go into the project for some of these enhancements. Again, a lot of these enhancements are due now or don't do or due later for a much higher cost. So there's some value and we'll have those conversations if need be, if there's supplemental funding that's needed. The other thing I should mention is some of these enhancements that we show, if there's funding that comes in from an outside source that works with that enhancement, but it's a little lower on the list, but there's funding that matches it exactly, that's going to bump it up the list. For example, if somebody wants to donate money for a habitat garden, then the habitat garden will move up the list of enhancements that we're able to build with the project. And again, we'll come back to you and give you updates on the contingency allowance and the enhancements that we're able to work in as we move through this project. So with your award of the contract tonight, our design team of Nolan Tam and Alton Construction will start working on the design. They've obviously already started somewhat in their proposal that they gave to us, but we've met with them. We're going to meet with them and some stakeholders, and we're going to fine tune the design, and they're going to transition it into the construction documents that are needed then for a building permit. And one thing you may see before you actually get a building permit for this is we may start on some of the site work. And part of that is triggered by one of the grant deadlines that we have some money that needs to be spent by June of this year, and the site work is eligible for that. So it's likely you'll see site work out this spring on the site before we actually do the vertical library. The vertical structure itself, probably later this year, maybe early 2025 is when you'll see the building start to go up. And then it'll take just under a year to construct. So we're trending end of 25, early 26 for completion of the structure. So that's the presentation. I'm available for any questions. And again, there are 2 requests tonight. One is awarding the contract to Alton, and the other is the resolution to amend the budget. And then there's if you look at the resolution that's attached with this item, it actually omits the line that asks you to award the contract. So don't know, City Attorney, if you have specific language that we need to amend that resolution to make that part of the request.
Yeah, so what I would suggest is adding to the title of the resolution at the current end of it, and authorize the city manager to sign a design build contract with Alton Construction, Inc. for an amount not to exceed $13,152,000 for the Larkspur Library and Community Space projects. And then additionally, after now therefore be it resolved, add a 3rd item to the numbered list to state the city manager is authorized to sign a design build contract with Alton Construction in an amount not to exceed $13,152,000 for the Larkspur Library at the Commons and Community Space projects, including any amendments consistent with the intent of this resolution that do not increase the city's obligations and subject to approval as to form by the city attorney.
Oh, yeah.
You can simply incorporate his things like,
And
and that was all in the staff report. It just should have been in the last part of the reso to emphasize. If I could, before I turn it over to you, Mr. Mayor, I really wanted to, first of all, thank Julian Skinner and his team, because they've been dealing with the minutia of this contract for quite a while. And I think they're eager to get going. So hopefully we'll have a resolution on this particular issue tonight. The other thing I wanted to point out, it was a hard decision and a tough conversation to recommend that one of the areas that we lower that budget is in the area of landscaping. But we did give some thought to what elements of the project, if we don't do today, aren't that hard to do later on. And of all the things in the project, the one that's easiest to keep working on and keep making better after you build the building is the landscaping and the outdoor features. Tonight, we really want you to focus particularly on the building, because that's the legacy decision in my mind for you this evening, is what is the scope of this capital project.
Okay, thank you, Julian. Fantastic presentation. Thank you. I also just want to take a second to thank the Commons Foundation. We would not be having this conversation if it were not for them. So I get a little choked up every time I think about it, because we are going to have a fantastic library, and it is because of the generosity of our community and the organization of the Commons Foundation to make this happen. And I am unbelievably grateful. And I just feel it necessary to say that every time this comes up. Having said that, let me turn it over. Well, I guess, are there any questions for staff? I think the order would be questions for staff, then public input, and council discussion. So let me ask council, are there any questions for staff?
I have one. Just Julian, just so I'm clear, that contingencies and enhancements to 613,000, which has the high priority, medium, and low priority. That 613 is under the 4,662,582.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
And Julian, I was going to ask that same question because if you go to the slide,
It was
it's
unclear.
not there. Is it just built, each one of these have something built into it for like a $50,000 here and 20,000 there, that type of thing?
So it wasn't in the presentation, but in the staff report, there is a separate table that lists the projects item by item. And under some of those projects, it has a contingency line item. And if you add those contingency line items up in that other table, it adds up to the 613.
Okay.
Got it. But for example, if you look at the numbers that equal the 16,115, it's made up of, 6 specific items. Those items have the contingencies built into them.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Sorry,
Good.
Vice
That
Mayor
was-
Way. was
That
there
was
more?
why I was confused where that number went.
I
So
was on the same page. Councilmember Paulson, any questions for staff?
No, I got it.
Councilmember Carroll, you're in a tiny little box right now, but do you have any questions for staff?
No, not this time.
Okay. In that case, I will open it up to the public. Does the public have any comments or questions for staff on this item? Come on up.
We've been working on this for.
I'm just so excited about this. Ann Morrison, President of the Common Foundation. We just want to say it's been a pleasure working with the city and being partners with you. And you've been so transparent and the timeline has been just superb. And I just have to give you guys thanks. It's been a pleasure working with you. And I'm just so excited about all this. So thank you very much. Oh, and by the way, we, the Common Foundation, we are doing a fundraising now to take on the medium priority and the low priority. So hopefully we raise the funds to do that. So we're going to continue with our partnership. Thank you.
Fantastic.
And well, since you're there, how do people who may be watching this now or later on YouTube find you?
Oh, we find them.
No, you can
Yeah.
give your address.
They can go ahead and look up the Commons Foundation and it's that simple. Yes. All right. So here we go. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other comments from the audience? Seeing none, I will bring it back to council for discussion. Would anyone in council like to begin this discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go. I think, my overall thought is from the 17 million, this is really a legacy investment. Just to clarify, my rant about Measure G is a tangent, but I think we'll resolve that later. So I'm feeling pretty good about this.
I'll echo that. We've been working on this since I was elected and even before that. And the Commons President, Ann Morrison, and I sat on her dining room table with Jeannie Friedel, who's over there, really trying to figure out how to make this happen. And it's had lots of stops and starts. But the amount of passionate community members who rallied together to raise over $5 million to get this seed money started is phenomenal. And that opportunity then allowed us to get a matching grant. I think we were the top number 3 matching grant in the state. And for our size jurisdiction, that's pretty phenomenal, which meant that we were able to demonstrate that we want to get a project done and we want to get a new library and community spaces. Although I adore our little library, and a lot of people say that to me, it does not meet the demands and the needs of contemporary library and community space usage for all of our generations, from the toddlers and the 40 strollers that are parked in the hallway outside to the seniors who enjoy sitting and conversing with the librarians. There's just not the space. And we've known that, and we need the space for the multiple ways in which communities interact. I think if anything that we've learned from COVID-19 is that community is massively important, and the isolation, especially with our seniors, is extraordinarily damaging to them. So the more opportunities we have to create community spaces. So I think this is an investment that a city local government should do. And we have been very conscientious and frugal with our funds for decades. And I leave that to the role that we inherited from our community council members who served in the roles before us to be very fiscally prudent. And we just heard our auditor telling us how that we have managed to be good stewards of the funds, and I can't imagine any better use of it than to make a legacy project like this. So I'm all for it.
Councilmember Carroll, any thoughts on this?
Plenty, but they've all been said. The last person to get involved in this. I was a regular visitor to the library. It is cute, but as Catherine said, it just doesn't meet our community's current needs and our projected future needs. And adding the disaster space based on the 15 years I was with the Red Cross, I think is just a fabulous addition and so well needed. So I'm all in favor of it, and the sooner Catherine makes the motion, the better.
All right, and just my final comments on this are that I'm just blown away by the generosity of our community, that we are going to have a phenomenally beautiful and functional $16 million building that, we never would have been able to have, and, now we can, for me, it's a no brainer that if we got to put an extra 4 million into this thing or 5 million into this, it's a project that we need, that we want. And as Catherine said, we've been very financially responsible so that when a project did come along, we'd be able to fund it. And I think here we are. So having said that, is there anybody, Catherine, who would like to make a motion?
Yes, but you're gonna have to repeat all that stuff you said. So I would like to move the City of Larkspur Resolution 0624. Is that the one you're looking for? The resolution of City of Larkspur amending adopted fiscal year 2023-2024 capital improvement program budget in the amount of $4,662,582 for the Larkspur Library at the Commons, access and parking, et cetera, et cetera. Do I need to read the rest of it? Including the two addendums. They're not really addendums. They are amendments or clarifications that were given by City Attorney Sky. That works.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Can we get a roll call?
Councilmember Carroll,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Way.
Yes.
Mayor Kendall.
Yes. Motion passes. Okay, returning to 8.5 just quickly, I think you were asking, do we have any direction or question or anything like that? I agree with Councilmember Paulson that we should review our capital improvement projects and look at this globally. I think we're committing to this, but we should have a feel for, now we know, we have some money to spend. What do we want to spend it on? So I am hoping that we have something that's already produced that maybe we can print out, even if it's an old copy, and maybe talk about it at our next meeting. Is that possible?
So I'm hoping to convene a special meeting of the Oversight Committee to get feedback that I can relay from them to you with my more concrete recommendations. When we bring that to you, I'm hoping to do that by the end of February. And so then we would bring this to you at a March or April meeting. And we will include as part of the presentation what the other capital projects are that potentially are eligible for the same pots of money so that you would be able to make that decision.
Perfect, thank you.
At this motion, we're guaranteeing that.
We're going to sign a contract now.
Yep.
So we've said we're going to pay for this.
We just don't know how yet.
Well, we know how, we just might have better ideas.
Right, okay. All right, so anything else that we need to do on any of those items? You have your direction or whatever we need?
We are good, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, the next item is adjournment. Do I have a motion to
Not
adjourn?
adjourn, close.
Oh, rats. Okay, we will adjourn. No, we will take
Adjourn
a
to closed session.
adjourn to closed session. We'll be back. There we go. Okay, we are going to adjourn to closed session for a conference with real property negotiators pursuant to Government Code, Section 54956.8. Good? Okay. Okay, we are reconvening after our closed session and we have nothing to report. Set. No reportable action. Having completed that, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Have a good night, everybody.